stream. Thank you very much. Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Kevin Orford, Chair of NHS Devon Integrated Care Board. Welcome to the ICB Board meeting of the 29th of May 2025. We do have some apologies for the meeting. We have apologies from Piers Tetley, from Donna Manson, Lopa Patel, Phil Mante and Kate Shields. And can I also welcome in her new role, to her first meeting in her new role of Chief Strategic Commissioning and Planning Officer, Libby Ryan Davis. Congratulations on your appointment, Libby, and welcome to the meeting in your new role. We also welcome members of the public viewing the meeting online and those in the room with us here today in Exeter. I'd like to remind everybody that this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. We do have some questions submitted from members of the public relating to items on today's agenda, and we have reserved time at the end of the meeting to cover those. Following this meeting of the board in public, just to let everyone know, there will be a meeting in private which will consider in detail some proposals relating to the national requirement to reduce ICB running costs by 50% alongside a redesign of the role and purpose of ICBs. This issue is referenced in my report as agenda item 2.1 of this meeting and also in the Chief Executive's report at 2.2. Now, before we start the meeting proper, I just want to highlight that at the meeting today, we were due to consider a proposal to establish a test and learn process for out-of-hours PPCI services, which is down as item 4.4 on the agenda. Now, we've received a significant number of wide-ranging comments from clinicians, partners, patients, the public, and from elected representatives. And in the light of those comments, we took the decision to withdraw the paper relating to these services. Withdrawing it will enable the feedback that we've received to be fully considered, and our key priority does remain to commission a safe, reliable and sustainable service for the future, given the changes in demand and workforce sustainability. And we'll continue to engage with clinicians and partners to design this and to find the most effective solutions for the whole population of Devon. And we intend that an updated proposal will come back to this board meeting in July, and that will take into account the valuable feedback that we've received. So we're grateful to everybody who shared their views, and we remain committed to a continued collaboration to find the best way forward for these services. So if we move to the agenda now, we move to the declarations of interest. Is there anything which anyone wants to add to the register, or anything to be highlighted to the board relating to specific items on today's agenda? Salma? Yeah, I have one. Could you put on your microphone, please, Salma? Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, I've recently been appointed as Vice Chair for Birmingham Community Healthcare Foundation Trust. I have informed our team here, but it's making its way through the governance process. But just thought I'd mention it here today.
Thanks for updating us on that, Salma, and congratulations on your appointment in Birmingham. So with that noted, let's note the register of interests. So if we now move on to the minutes of the ICB board meeting held on the 27th of March 2025. I'm not going to go through them page by page, but are there any points of accuracy which board members would like to highlight? So if not, then is the meeting happy to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 27th of March? Thank you. The minutes are now approved. We can now move to the action register at item 1.4 on the agenda. There is a recommendation for closure against action ICB 241021, which relates to capacity to deliver to the organisational development plan, and it's reported on the action register that this list has now been articulated on the corporate risk register. Are there any questions relating to this recommendation, and are we happy to close that action? In that case, let's agree to close the action. There are two further actions which are in progress. These relate to staff surveys and also to services for children and young people. And these have completion dates at the beginning of July and at the end of September, respectively. Are there any questions relating to progress on these actions? Then, if not, we'll approve the action register. Thanks, everybody. On to the leadership reports at section 2 of the agenda now. First of all, there is my chair's report. I'm going to take the report as read, but there are 3 issues which I'd just like to highlight to the board, and there are 2 recommendations for action. So, first, my report references the national developments relating to the requirement to reduce ICB running costs by 50% alongside a redesign of the role and purpose of ICBs. This issue is referenced more fully in the Chief Executive's report, which comes next on the agenda, so I suggest that any questions that we have on this, that we raise them at that point. I also want to report that NHS England has approved the ICB Board's proposed amendments to the NHS Devon Constitution, which we considered at our March meeting. And the final NHS approved constitution is included as an appendix to my report. And then finally, the report asks the board to note the exercise of powers in respect of the approval of a deed of variation to the tripartite Section 75 agreement, which is in place between NHS Devon, Torbay and South Devon NHS Foundation Trust and Torbay Council, which relates to the delivery of integrated adult social care services in Torbay, and which we approved at this board in March 2024. So the board is asked to ratify the deed of variation, which has been agreed by all parties, which states that any party may give written notice to terminate the agreement by 30th of September 2025, with such notice to take effect on the 1st of October 2026. After the 30th of September 2025, any party may terminate the agreement by giving not less than 12 months written notice to the other parties, with such notice to take effect on the 1st of April in any given period. So we're asked to approve that. And then finally, the board is asked to approve the proposed amendments to the terms of reference and to 3 board committees. And those amendments reflect the appointment of the new Chief Strategic Commissioning and Planning Officer. So can I ask if there's any questions on my report as a whole, or are there any questions on the recommendations in the report? Sam.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the deed of variation, would it be possible to just explain the reasoning behind the decision to change the timing?
Steve.
Yeah, as you're aware, some challenges around that arrangement. This is a way of ensuring that all parties can work together to get the best answer, the most considered answer, essentially give some breathing space for the work and the due diligence to be done. Of course, that's particularly true with the new Chief Executive coming in Torbay, wishing to ensure that he's fully appraised of things before making any decisions. It felt like another year would have been too long, and the decision by all parties was to do that within 6 months. So it's a practical step to support that.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions on my report? In that case, is the board happy to note the exercise of powers and ratify the decision that was taken around the Section 75 agreement? Thank you. We note and ratify that. And is the board happy to approve the proposed amendments to the terms of reference to the board committees? Thank you very much. Then those are approved, and I will now invite the Chief Executive to present his report. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's a couple of things I wanted to pull out. I just wanted to acknowledge where we are at the moment. It feels like in 35 years in the NHS, whilst there are always challenges and it always feels like quite a fast-moving environment, particularly over the last few months, the amount of work, the amount of change, the degree of things that we are dealing with, both at ICB level and across the whole of the NHS, actually is pretty unprecedented. And I just wanted to recognise for the team I have around me, around the table, my executive team, and indeed out into the organisation, just the huge amount of work that's gone on over the last few months, reflected in the the very regular board meetings that we've had to have, actually. I know we've probably spent more time together than some of you may like, which I'm very grateful for. But that pace continues, and if anything, it's going to continue to accelerate. And it's just something I think we need to be cognizant of. But I just wanted to record my thanks today to a team who's really pulled together on a whole range of fronts. And actually, you'll see in some of the papers, while some of our ambitions for this year are quite ambitious, we've got an awful lot in play at the moment and trying to make a lot of changes very quickly. In terms of the actual report, I guess, as the Chair said, to recognise that actually since our last public meeting, at least, the model ICB blueprint has now been published. The board, I think, is very well aware of the work now ongoing, the rapid work now ongoing to design transitional arrangements that need to be in place by the end of December, including the potential for clustering to achieve the £18.76 per head of population target that's been set for all ICBs across England. A couple of things I know the board are aware of, but I think it's just worth saying in this public meeting is all of our statutory duties continue to be in play in making those changes. So our work is very much with our colleagues in Cornwall at the initial stage to be focused on where we have duplication, where doing things on a wider footprint can reduce costs, and I think that's important to register. So our proposal, which is being submitted to NHS England, is to explore that clustering with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly with a view to potential merger in the future. And I think there is a live debate going on again across the whole of England about the clustering step and then the merging step beyond that. And that's something we'll be picking up in our due diligence discussion with NHS England colleagues next week. I think the last point I'd like to make in relation to this, and to recognise we have had an opportunity to go through this in seminar a week ago, is just to reiterate that at the moment this is a proposal that's being worked on, and it's a proposal to see whether we can make the model work within the confines, the constraints that have been set for ICBs. It will need NHS England approval as part of national deliberation, and it may be that there are further changes needed to be made in light of the work that's ongoing. So a really big step forward. I think there's been a lot of really good working between us and our colleagues in Cornwall, but we need to bear in mind that there could be further change as we start to build the depth of the model going forward. I would also, just to reiterate the Chair's comment, welcome Libby, no stranger to this board, but I think this is your first meeting in your substantive role. Really great to have you on board, and I can see today many of the papers have been for you and the team, and have been developed by you and the team, which I'm very grateful for. The more substantive elements that I'm asking for some board reflection on. Firstly, the transition to a formal trade union recognition agreement. This has been approved by the executives, but I'm seeking board endorsement of that approval today and an opportunity to get your views. Given where we are and given the progress we've been making, this feels like a sensible step for us to support our staff going forward. It also aligns us better with arrangements in Cornwall around their own recognition agreement. And I think we should recognise that whilst there was a strong staff view from a survey done in 2013 that because we lacked a sufficient local TU representation, there was a concern, and therefore we set up the staff partnership forum instead of having a recognition agreement. Actually, things have moved on quite a great deal now, both in terms of the amount of workload, given the organisational change that we're going through, that is a concern for that forum, but also in terms of local representation. So again, it feels like for a number of reasons it's a sensible step to take, but I would welcome board views on that. I've also given an update on collective action. And I think I would just say in relation to all of that, we should recognise that whilst much of our focus has been on pressure in the secondary care system, there is huge pressure in primary care, and we continue to work constructively with all of our primary care colleagues about how best we can support them to do and deal with that pressure that they are feeling too. And then finally on EPRR is to approve I'm asking the board to approve the new policy following the recent review, and I guess now more than ever that's an important policy to make sure we have in place. I'm happy to take any questions on any of that or anything else in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Are there any questions for the Chief Executive? Graham.
Not a question itself, but just a point of emphasis, both in the, given this is a public meeting, in both the Chair and the Chief Exec's report, it references 50% reduction to the ICB, but I think in your narrative, Steve, you pointed out that actually that's on average, and actually both Devon and Cornwall ICBs actually are below the median, and thus it's actually a smaller number for us. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Good point of clarification. So yes, that 50% was national. The local percentage for Devon, given some of the work that had already happened last year, was 33%. In fact, I think we were one of the lowest, but still a significant impact for us. And Cornwall is slightly higher than that. I think it's 38%. Nevertheless, every ICB's got to get within £18.76. So that is the focus of our work now. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Graham. Mark.
Yeah, just to help clarify that, the £18.76 is an average, and it's applied to the regional footprint. So because inevitably, and there are discussions about what functions might be shared across more than one cluster, for example, where things can be done once, not by the region, but on a regional footprint, because you can create critical mass and save money. So that's being worked through at the moment. So we're being tasked to work with the ICBs to do that within £18.76 across the region, because some may host things like, for example, Somerset ICB hosts this primary care commissioning hub, which means that it carries more cost because it does that. So it's a regional target to achieve rather than specific individual, because I think that would be a little bit unfair.
Thanks for that clarification, Mark. Any other questions for Steve? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I noted in your report, Steve, we talk about the One Devon Collaborative Corporate Services business case and the change in terms of the assumption. I wonder if that could come back to the FPC or for us to have a look at that, just to get some assurance on the revised business case.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. Apologies, I should have raised that. We discussed it in exec team. You'll see in the report that broadly it's a positive, even though it's a more challenging position in some ways, we've come out with a more positive answer broadly. But the intention and the decision from the executive team was to take it through that committee. So we will do the detail of that, because actually a number of things have changed within it, albeit that the headlines are fairly benign. So yes, we'll absolutely do that.
Are there any other questions for Steve? If not, then let's note the report. I think it'd be good, to record the board's thanks to the ICB teams relating to the significant workload of the last few months. So let's formally record that in the minutes. Let's also note that the proposal for the clustering model does require NHS England approval, that this is just a proposal at the moment. And also I think we should note the really good working relationships that we've been developing with Cornwall ICB. And we've also agreed that the Corporate Services business case will go through to the Finance and Performance Committee for review. The board is asked then to endorse the transition to a formal trade union recognition agreement to replace the existing staff partnership form arrangement. Is the board happy to endorse the transition to a formal trade union recognition agreement? Thank you. Let's endorse that. And the board is also asked to approve the emergency preparedness, resilience and response policy. Is the board content to approve that policy? Thank you very much, and thank you, Steve, for your report. Let's move on to section 3 of the agenda, which relates to the National Oversight Framework, segment 4. Can I suggest that we take both these items, 3.1 and 3.2, that we take them together? So I'm going to ask Kirsty to talk first of all to 3.1, which is the progress report on NOF4, and then I'm going to ask Philippa to talk to 3.2, which is the self-assessment of the performance against the key NOF measures. And then I'll ask Steve I'll invite Steve to talk, and then we'll open it up for questions. Kirsty, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is obviously against specific criteria that's for NOF4 and needs to be sort of considered in the current context of where we are and the challenges we have going forward anyway in 25-26, and that has been a bit of a debate at the Finance and Performance Committee. But the report itself asks for satisfactory assurance for everything apart from UEC, which is partial assurance. So this is where it's improved but not yet meeting the revised trajectory. Also, elective is still under trajectory on 65-week weights, but again, that is continuing to improve. What we're also expecting is this will be the last type of this report for NOF4. So we are developing a new performance framework which will capture all of these metrics plus more going forward to manage our in-year performance and delivery in 25-26. And so we think that will replace this reporting. We obviously then need to look at what the new performance framework is nationally when it's published, to just check that our performance framework does pick up on any elements that are in that. So this is a proposal. This will be the last NOF4 report of this type that comes to the board. But happy to take any questions.
Okay, can I invite Philippa to take us into 3.2? Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you. So, whereas the report that Kirsty's just presented talks about most recent performance, the report that's headed up system self-assessment against performance against key NOF measures, it gives an overview of the general performance of the whole system against the NOF, and then is supported by individual reports from each of the organisations that are currently within segment 4 of the NOF as well. It aims to set out information that provides assurance to the board in terms of the delivery of the exit criteria that we agreed with NHS England. It's not part of a formal process with NHS England, but it's good practice for the board to take a view on where the system is in respect of the NOF, given the point that we are at this quarter 1 of 25-26. I'm not going to go into the detail because I'm assuming people have read it, but I will pass over to Steve, who wants to give an overview.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. And again, grateful for all the work that's gone into this. I think when I asked Kirsty if she could pull together a report, I didn't realise I was asking for 5 reports from across the system to be coordinated at probably one of the most busy times of year, even before some of the other things that happen. So I'm very grateful for all of that. I think probably just a couple of points I've made. I mean, the board, I think, is very well aware, very well steeped in the sort of NOF4 approach. So I didn't propose going into the detail of that too much. But if I do a couple of reflections, and then I wanted to give you a view from me, sort of as the accountable officer, about where I think we've got and what I think we'll be expressing to region and the RSP team. I think with all of these criteria, there has always been a tension or a difference between the spirit of what was in the ambition to get us out of escalation and the absolute targets that we were trying to hit. The spirit being very much about improvement, about the organisations and the system more generally getting better, whereas some of the absolutes were about absolutely hitting targets. And when you take a step back and look at where we've got with much of this, in some cases those things are aligned, and in other cases they are somewhat unaligned. So actually there's a real judgment call then about what that means for the system, the confidence in this system and the confidence in the individual providers. So taking a step back, my proposal to board, which I think is captured in the report, but to try and balance all of that as best we can, is that for the 5 areas in which we have formally been escalated, that for the first one around leadership, I think for all sorts of reasons, I would recommend to board that feels like an area in our self-assessment that we should be saying should be de-escalated. We've seen a significant beneficial change in senior leadership behaviour, system thinking, and our ability to work together, not least demonstrated through one of the most difficult, challenging planning rounds that we've ever had, that we came at that together as a community, which I think is really good to see. On strategy, I think this is partly the spirit question. I think, as you'll see in the papers later on the agenda, we've got an enormous amount to do. We know how important it is, and actually what the system has lacked about having a clear strategic direction upon which to pin all of its individual plans and tactical moves. So on strategy, whilst I think we can demonstrate that actually we've made both good progress on the granular targets and we're moving in the right direction, I think probably whilst we may want to de-escalate, my recommendation would be through whatever replaces our escalation arrangements, our oversight arrangements with NHS England, that we continue to use that as a way of reporting to NHS England as well as to this board our progress in delivering and landing that strategy over the next 6 months. It feels like once we've got that, we'd feel much more confident that we've got to the right place. So I'm suggesting de-escalation, but with that continued oversight that we would seek from our regional colleagues. On UEC and planned care, I think this is the one where very strongly the spirit is absolutely pointed in the right direction, and in some cases we've hit the absolute targets. These are strongly about improvement, but we need to recognise that in some of the targets themselves we haven't been able to get where we wanted to get. But nevertheless, I think on the basis of that spirit, I would recommend to board that we recommend that we support a de-escalation score for those two. And then I think the most tricky one, because it points in the other direction in some ways, is whilst for many of the finance targets in terms of delivering on the year-end position, for example, having a plan that has now been approved for this year, whilst the absolutes may have been ticked, the spirit still feels slightly in the wrong place in that we know what an enormous challenge we have this year. So my recommendation to board is that we don't make any recommendation on that. We ask for it to be considered during the first quarter of this year to show what progress we're making as a system and as individual organisations. So if I had to summarise that, I would say we are suggesting that we would recommend putting forward to NHS England a suggestion of de-escalation for leadership and for strategy, with the caveat around an ongoing oversight of that strategic work. That we recommend a de-escalation for planned care and UEC on the basis of the significant progress that's made. And if you look at paragraph 13 to 17 for UEC, comparing it to where we were in June 22, some really big changes, albeit recognising we are definitely not where we need to be, and that needs to continue. And then finally for money, that we don't make a recommendation at this stage, that we ask for ongoing overview and a bit of proof in delivery for this year, given the size of the challenge that we face. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Steve. So let's open this up for questions relating to both of the papers. Lincoln.
Yes, thanks. Very good explanation there. I wanted to go back to the UEC because that's what I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I wanted to go to the UEC discussion about the de-escalation, because to some extent the first paper we considered said that was partial assurance, and to some extent of the criteria, it was the one that you would say was more shaky. I will accept the real progress that has been made, but to some extent, where we need to be, we're still some way off. And I wasn't clear what the step change would be that would be needed. So to some extent, when we take the pressure off, do we then slip back into, Or are we doing something that puts us on a trajectory? And does that then have to do with capacity and funding, which then puts pressure on our financial situation going forward? So understanding a little bit about the underlying factors there and about the ambulance handoffs and stuff, which seem from the narrative to be where some of the core problems are, would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Lincoln. I think that in some way strikes to the heart of this. The first thing I would say in terms of the improvement is set out in one of those paragraphs in the self-assessment, but we need to recognise that whilst we've improved by 10% since June 22, and we've gone from being 12% below the national average to 4%, absolutely we need to continue to drive that. I think in answer to your question, the later papers, particularly around the performance management regime that we're putting in place against quite a challenging operating plan, is going to be our way of ensuring that we continue to drive forward change, that we don't take our foot off the accelerator. In fact, if anything, we need to accelerate those things. So in Plymouth, for example, the opening of the new urgent treatment centre is going to be really key to their plans, and we need to absolutely make sure that that's maximised. So I think it's about kind of where we were in the old year, but now the board getting its confidence, and we'll discuss this later on the board papers, about do we have the grip and control now to continue that path regardless of the levels of escalation that we have.
Thanks. I've got Frank and then Alison. Frank.
Thank you, Chair. The one thing I'd like to really focus on is to commend the executive and all the providers for what they managed to achieve last year. In all of this, it is very easy for us to say we failed, but there was a 223 million ICS efficiency saving last year, which is absolutely huge. And I don't think we should lose that. And everyone, and the providers and the ICB should be congratulated. That said, I don't think we should underestimate the challenge for them this year to deliver on UEC and for delivery of planned care. It is a huge ask in the present context, and they're going to need all the support they can get from us to deliver that.
Thank you, Frank. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. If I can loop back to something Philippa said at the beginning, the self-assessment is something that is not a formal part of the decision around NOF4 escalation, de-escalation, however you want to describe it. But I think is an important part of a process that we've agreed locally, because it also demonstrates the level of insight that a board has to the journey that it's been on and where they find themselves now. And this is further complicated this year by the fact that the Q1 assessment and a recommendation that would ordinarily go from region up to the national QPC regarding exit or not exiting the NOF4 arrangements isn't quite straightforward because of the change in the national framework. And so we're not going to know the decision regarding exiting NOF4 or son or daughter, child of, whatever comes next, until that is done nationally. And that segmentation will be done, I'm sure Mark might want to comment on this, by region for everyone. And at that stage, a decision will be made about exiting NOF4. That may coincide with the Q1 timescale. End of Q1 timescale. It might not, because we're a bit of a slave to the national process and national timetable. But if we look at the, and if I can sort of loop back to the comments that Steve made, having been on this journey with the system and having had the opportunity to have some of the discussions with the other boards which are reflected in their board papers, I would concur with the view that Steve has outlined, that in terms of leadership, I think there is the ability to demonstrate significant change and improvement. On UEC and elective, I think we mustn't forget that there is a parallel Tier 1 and Tier 2 process. So whilst the progress is absolutely recognised, that has been reflected in the de-escalation for elective care from Tier 1 to Tier 2, and that oversight arrangement will continue irrespective of RSP, and that the system still remains in Tier 1. And there is some associated pain with that, with the weekly rhythm of very detailed oversight of the performance trajectories, and just to reassure the board that that is going to be continuing, and that will be part of maintaining that pressure on the delivery of the improvement trajectories that have been put into the plan for 25-26, and that critical oversight will continue irrespective. I I think that we can reflect on how the shift of the RSP support has been over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. And that the team would probably be very pleased that they've seen less of me in the ICB. We've had very light touch support into our DUH over the last year, more into UHP around UEC, and the switch of the attention into Torbay, which is exactly what you would expect, given the sort of change in performance across the system. I think it's very wise in terms of the strategy to say that, you know, give us another 6 months, because we've got a lot of work to do, but as you'll hear later in the agenda, there is a plan to do that. And I think also it's a fair reflection that the jury's out a bit on the money at the moment, for two reasons. One is that the timetable for the refresh of the medium-term financial plan is not aligned with the end of Q1, because that is September. And it's only when that is completed will you sort of almost get the tick in the box against an agreed plan for recurrent balance, and also the challenges in this year. I think probably Q2 will be the time when perhaps Q1 might be a bit ambitious, Steve, but I would have thought by the time you're sort of really into Q2, you'll have a real sense of the deliverability of this plan. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying I'm in agreement with what Steve's suggesting, objectively from where I sit on behalf of the RSP team.
Thanks, Alison. Steve, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, you have been missed. There was a time when I started, we're walking around the office, you seem to be on everyone's screen, so in a nice way. But I'm really grateful for all the support that you've given us, Alison. You continue to, as you say, in a sort of changing environment. Yet the point I just wanted to pick up, and I know the board is really clear about this, but whilst I think it is a sign of maturity that we can reflect sincerely on where we are and understand that and be able to give that back to the board. The judgments are not our judgments to make, they are ultimately NHS England's judgments to make, but I think it does help with that discussion about having that system view. So this isn't about us choosing to de-escalate, absolutely not. It's us saying what we believe to be the case or not. I just wanted to make sure that was absolutely clear.
Okay, I've got Mark, Tandy and then Sam. So to Mark first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Alison said a lot of what I was going to cover, so I won't repeat some of that, but just some of the context and process around this as well, which I think might be helpful. We had a South West Chief Execs meeting this morning, which I know some members of the board were present, where we just updated on the new framework. It's out to consultation at the moment, so we can provide you with the details of how to access that. I think the consultation closes tomorrow on the new framework and how the metrics are going to work. What it doesn't do is say what these metrics say you are in terms of a system or an ICB or an organisation, or the consequences of certain segmentations, other than there will now be a segment 5, and segment 5 will be where you get the recovery support programme. It's not necessarily automatic that those currently in RSP, like Devon, or the 4 organisations that currently are part of that in Devon, automatically go into that segment 5, because it's going to be very much a metrics-based algorithm that determines your segmentation based on your performance of published data. It's not weighted. There's about 76 different measures in it. It's quite complex. And perhaps at some point we can take you through the detail of that once we've got the first run of the data, which will be published, we think, towards the end of June, early July time for the first run of this. There'll also be a capability assessment, but it won't affect segmentation. It was going to initially, but that's been changed now. The Secretary of State is pretty clear that he wants to focus on metrics and performance, but we still will be undertaking capability assessments. For providers, that will be a self-assessment. For ICBs, that's still under discussion because of the changes that you've alluded to in terms of the new model of ICBs that we're working on at the moment. So that's the process stuff. The NOF criteria, as you know, was a point in time, and it's really difficult, and it's largely based on expectations in 24-25. We're now in 25-26. So that transition is going to be quite a challenge for all of us. My advice is focus on performance. And I know you've got details of that on your board agenda today, because the expectation from NHS England or our future form, whatever that may be, will be that all boards will be expected to focus on performance. And if you read the NOF criteria, that's basically what the expectation is. So delivering the UEC targets, delivering elective targets in a financially within your financial envelope, cancer targets and so on. So that'll be, if you like, as Kirsty said, this will be the last sort of NOF report you have, but I would encourage you to absolutely focus on the performance aspect of this. And the leadership will form part of that as well, because of the capability assessment I'll describe, but we won't know the detail of that probably for another quarter or 4 or 5 months, unfortunately. But we can help guide you through some of that. But the absolute focus, we think we're encouraging boards, all boards, ICB boards and provider boards, focus on delivery of the 25-6 plan, because that will influence the outcomes of the new oversight framework and the consequences of not meeting your commitments to the 25-26 plan. And that encapsulates a lot of the discussion that you've already had. I agree with Alison. De-escalation is a useful term in some point. I'd encourage you to think about achievement of progress, as I think has already been alluded to. You have made significant progress in lots of areas. The capability, the focus on 25-26, the financial challenges that all organisations in the NHS have got at the moment, the delivery of critical performance is going to be absolutely key. What I wouldn't want the board to be led into is we can take our foot off the brake. I think that's already been mentioned in these areas, because it's going to be a very challenging year, as you know. So my encouragement would be focus all of your reporting on the key performance elements that is expected, because once the framework comes into play, that's what you'll be judged and measured against.
It's very helpful, Mark, thank you. I just missed what you were proposing to change de-escalate to what, did you say?
Acknowledgement of progress.
Acknowledgement of progress, okay, thanks. Do you want to continue?
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, it was an interesting discussion this morning around the new assessment framework. I just wonder it would be helpful at the right point for the board to have a bit of time in a seminar session to understand some of that, and whether you'd be able to support that for us. I'm sure other boards will be demanding your time as well around some of this, but perhaps if we could do that once it's been published, without knowing what our segmentation is necessarily, at least we can understand the mechanisms.
Sorry, Chair, just finally, as Alison said, as we've already been doing over the last year or so, the focus, we're not just going to drop RSP because of the consequences of doing that, but the focus will be very much on the particular areas that we collectively agree you need support and help in. So that will be Torbay in South Devon and some aspects of elective or urgent care where that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So let's move to Tandy now, please. Thank you, Tandy.
Thanks. I think some of what I wanted to raise has been addressed by Alison and Mark. I think for me, there's two things here. One is us trying to get out of that NOF 4 level, which obviously is in response to the position that we're at. But I think the more important thing is us trying to make sure that we progress what we've been doing already. And I think that we are going to be in a worse state than we have been, in that we'll still be required to deliver all of that with less money, probably less staff. So I think that for me, maybe de-escalate de-escalate in the sense of removing the label, but actually in terms of practice and what we're doing, I think that should be an intensification of what we're doing, given what resources we're going to lose. Given that, and I think you said this is going to be the last report in this format, I'm just wondering about the timing there, given that we haven't got a full understanding of what the new framework will be. Would it not make sense to carry on with this and then change over when that is out?
So we have developed a new framework to use in 25-26, okay. and the finance element of that's going to Finance Performance Committee for the month 1 data. it captures what's in here plus more, and I think it's more relevant to 25-26 and the information going forward. So I would propose that we do move to that framework, and we've got similar being developed for quality, performance and workforce. So it'll all be relative.
So we're not going to be in a
place.
space where we've lost some insights or some valuable
No,
stuff
probably,
that we'll be getting.
probably
by this
gain.
process, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tandy. Thanks, Kirsty. So I'm going to invite Sam, and then the final, perhaps final comments from Kay. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Chair. So I think it's really helpful to see this report, isn't it? And I welcome the move to the new performance framework that's happening over the next few months. And as Mark says, I think it's really important to stand back from this and look at the metrics. So paragraph 15 says that we are now 34th out of 42 ICBs on UEC metrics. And paragraph 20 says we're now 15th out of 42 ICBs on RTT. So I think on those two, it's Frank's point, isn't it? We need to look at this objectively, which is why I fully support Steve's recommendations. I do also agree with Andy, though, that we know that the big challenge coming is the finance and the strategy, and we need to come back to that in conversation. But I think on the key performance metrics, just important to, it's a relative ranking. I'm a firm believer in that.
Thank you, Sam. And then to Kay, and then we'll try and just sum up the conversation that we've had around this. Kay.
Thanks, Chair. So I thought I might just reflect on a couple of FPC, Finance Performance Committee conversations. And I think we had quite long conversations in our last two meetings. And if I was to sort of try and summarise where we got to, I think I would say that we concluded that two things can be true at the same time. So the first thing is true, that we have made significant progress. That's demonstrable. We've seen that in the figures. The second thing, which can also be true, is we are facing a significant challenge in 25-26. So those two things are both true, and we can accept that they're both true, and therefore I think that's probably supportive of the conversation we just had in your response, Steve.
Thanks, Kay. Okay, let me try and summarise where we are on items 3.1 and 3.2. And let's record in the minutes the thanks to the ICB teams for the work on these NOF4 reports, and also for the delivery. And Frank's point, I think we should also commend all of our providers, primary and secondary care, actually, for what was achieved in 24-25. And Frank particularly noted the significant level of efficiency savings which was achieved during 24-25. Let's also note our gratitude for the support for Alison and her team at the RSP. And let's also note that this is the last time that we'll have a report in this format, that there's a new performance report being developed and a new national performance framework. And we've agreed that, well, it was recommended to us that we create some board seminar time to understand that new performance framework. I think I was hearing a consensus around the room that we de-escalate or acknowledge the progress on leadership, on strategy, on UEC and planned care, but also that we just reserve our opinion on the financial position, just given the significant challenges that we've got in the plans for 25-26. And suggested that we should review that at the end of Q1. There was a suggestion of it might be Q2 until we get there, but I think it would be really good for us to just have a really good look at the finances once we've got the Q1 numbers. And obviously that will go through the Finance and Performance Committee first, but I would like to just bring that assessment into this board meeting as well, if we could possibly do that. So we have two recommendations here relating to the National Oversight Framework Progress Report. We're being asked to agree the assurance ratings relating to each of the NOF4 progress positions, all of which are satisfactory other than UEC, which is rated at partial. And we are asked to take satisfactory assurance that adequate plans are in place to mitigate the risks relating to the delivery of NOF4 exit identified in the locality planning and delivery meetings and the system leadership group. Are we happy to agree that recommendation? Thank you. And on 3.2, which is the self-assessment report, we're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the information provided with regard to the One Devon Integrated Care Systems position and the achievements against the agreed NOF4 exit criteria, whilst noting the significant challenges still faced by the system, particularly in relation to the delivery of the 25-26 operational plan. Are we happy to agree that recommendation? Alison.
Chair, the only addition I think it might just be worth adding is that in the self-assessment undertaken by TSD, which is included in the papers, they are only taking limited assurance, which is different from the rest of the system, and reflects the position that they currently find themselves in now.
Okay, let's note in the minutes the highlighting of the limited assurance in the self-assessment for TSD, and we should also note the support that RSP is putting into Torbay and South Devon Foundation Trust at the moment to help them deliver on the plan that they've agreed for 25-26. Thanks, Alison. So let's move on to section 4 of the agenda, which is discharging NHS Devon's responsibilities in 25-26, and I'd like to invite Libby to take us into item 4.1, which is delivery of the 25-26 Devon operational plan.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note before I go into this paper that board members will see an absolute connection between the 3 papers in this section, and it's important as we go through to note that. I think we've already mentioned today, we know we have an extremely ambitious operational plan that contains significant risk for all organisations, which we're continuing to work on mitigating. But what this paper sets out is the delivery oversight, the commissioning intentions, and the identified ICB priorities in year to ensure the delivery of our plan. So just wanted to pick out a few things from the paper before opening up to questions. So within this paper, what you'll see is that we clearly articulate our commissioning priorities for this year in the commissioning plan that's contained within the paper. And we've approached this through 4 priority areas: delivering equitable services, delivering best value within the allocation, delivering strategic change, and delivering support for in-year pressures. And the plan will need to be agile to respond to those changing priorities and risks as we move throughout the year. A key part of our commissioning plan for this year as well, given the model ICB blueprint, is how we look to increase our strategic commissioning capabilities and processes, so that alongside what we need to continue to contract this year, we're looking more to the future in terms of more strategic commissioning intentions aligned to the development of the health and care strategy, which I'll talk a bit about in the future paper. In terms of any specific questions around the commissioning plan, John Finn will be able to pick up any detail that the board wish to go into. Alongside the commissioning plan within the paper, you'll see we've already made reference to the work that we've been doing to oversee the delivery of the system plan through the new performance management framework. And obviously we will be continuing to review that in line with the national framework, pending the consultation, obviously. The dashboard that will inform the process and the revised report that we've referred to that will replace the NOF report is also attached to the paper. And as I said, that will need to continue to be agile to change to the national requirements. The paper also references the annual plan delivery, which is obviously going to be discussed in the following paper in more detail, but just so that board members can see the absolute alignment between the oversight of the delivery of the operational plan with the annual plan priorities. So happy to take comments, Chair, as is John.
Okay, let's open it up for observations and questions. I've got John and then Graham. John. Sorry, John, did you not want to? Oh, right, sorry.
He was waving.
In that case, Graham and then Kay.
Thank you. Just a very specific question on the commissioning piece. I looked at two numbers which I first thought seemed sensible, and I thought, are they? 4% efficiency improvement providers, but 2% in the voluntary sector. What was the logic around the difference, please?
Yeah, this is something that we did discuss in depth in the ICB. I think the logic is actually the capability of the voluntary sector actually being able to operate on that level of funding reduction. They operate on a much leaner platform actually than we say NHS provision. So it's broadly based on that. And we did discuss it with the national team right at the beginning of this process, who had expressed, not say concern basically, but they said there was that certainly there should be a differential approach to the voluntary sector.
Thanks, Graham. Was it on this point you wanted to come in, Frank? Or okay, I'll bring in Kay first, and then I'll bring you in afterwards, Frank.
Thank you, Chair. So, a couple of areas for me I'd like to explore a bit. So, first of all, the decommissioning process looked very thorough, and I was wondering if we could start to think about how we might put some of that in place to prepare for 26-27. Irrespective of, if our plans deliver perfectly in 25-26, which I'm sure they won't because they never do. But, if even that was the case, then we could get ahead perhaps. And so I thought that was a really good process, and let's start to use it.
Yeah. John? I think this is the first year in many commission organisations that we've had a plan, a formal commissioning plan. I think it's really, maybe not come across in the paper base, but what's really important is this is a live document. It will be as live this year as it is next year. It'll continue to evolve. It'll continue to increase. So we had one of the funding agreements that went through the exec this week was to invest in CVD. Now that will come into the plan, right? As everything else will over the rolling 18 months, basically. So we will be looking to 2-3 years hence, and all these basically some of the decommissioning in terms of the opportunity to actually do that doesn't exist until 2 years' time, basically because of the contract arrangements. So it's a live document at this point. It'll grow and become a bigger part of what we do on both a day-to-day basis and looking over the next 2-3 years.
Thanks, Sean. Kay.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So my other point, which is separate, was about the month one reporting in the appendix. So when I looked at it, I thought, are we starting to see some problems here? And so I picked up just a couple of little examples. There was a lot of really good information in there. So, for example, at RDU, it looks like the workforce whole-time equivalence and pay bill is over plan. But non-elective work is 12% over. At Plymouth, non-elective work's only 1% over. At Torbay, 6% over. So I was just thinking, in general, we've already got a set of month one information. So the set for me about pace and how do we start to take action on the information we've already got, which links back to the conversation we had about NOF4. We're not going to have that same report. We've got this really good framework now, but we really need to get onto this promptly.
Yeah,
John.
Okay. So in terms of planning to move into the new world of post this organisation, we've set up, and the first one's actually happened back to contract reviews where we're detailing looking at the schedules in terms of UEC, elective, cancer, high cost drugs, things that we just haven't had that detail before. The first one being in Plymouth last week. So as well as the performance management, which is absolutely key, contract management is increasingly becoming a bigger part of our role. Now we have some challenges in our capacity, but that'll be focused in areas of greatest challenge as you described in UHP. Now that'll move to RDU, Torbay over the coming weeks, months, etc. But that's an added focus as we go forward, and very much in line with the expectations around cluster arrangements going forward.
Libby, did you want to come in on this point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw attention to the detail around the performance management framework within here, and what we've spent a lot of time developing is understanding the escalations that we need so that we can have a really quick response to where there's any indications that things are going off, and with that very tactical, strategic approach. So I think we're confident that it's the right approach. And as you can see, we're already picking those up and taking those through that process. So I think that's what hopefully the board will see in this approach is that those mechanisms are there to identify and escalate.
Okay, does that satisfy the question you asked, Kate?
Yes, it'd be good to see this through the Finance Performance Committee, so through the assurance committees as well, but yeah.
The only thing I would add, and it's in the paper, is this is built on a weekly pace. I mean, we don't have data for everything on a weekly basis, but the focus will be week by week because you'll know better than me. The earlier you course correct, the less difficult that becomes. So we don't want to make the mistakes of previous years, and I've seen it in many organisations where you wait till September and then by then you're in recovery mode and you never really recover. So this was one of the fundamental building blocks of this was it starts now. It's taken us a while to get this developed, so but we are now on it, and that pace is starting, and I think that will keep us as safe as possible. As you say, no plan is ever completely delivered, but this will give us the very best chance of delivering what we've set out.
Do you want to come back on that point, Libby?
Yeah, just in terms of committees, just to say that it is scheduled to come through the committees to the next committees so that we can get into this in a bit more detail.
Thanks for that confirmation, Libby. So I've got Frank, Lincoln, Alison and Graham. So Frank first, please.
Thank you. It's just a request as we go forward to be quite sophisticated in how we commission strategically, because if you read the paper, and I'll use the IAPS as an example, we're overperforming in IAPS, and therefore it seems very sensible to take money out. Until you look at the whole mental health commissioning, where you've got significant mental illness, you've got IAPS at the bottom, and you've got a whole gap in the middle. So if you decommission certain IAP services, which you think, because you're comparing what you think is like with like nationally, what you do is actually reduce the delivery, but there's nothing provided, and therefore those people go somewhere. They probably go to primary care. So while looking at any particular contract, we also need to look at what we're not contracting for and the unintended consequences of whatever that we recommission the next time. So it just needs to become more system commissioning rather than very specific service commissioning.
Thanks, Frank. John, would you like to respond to that?
I think, Frank, that's absolutely a brilliant introduction to a short discussion on the commissioning hub. Because what you've said is absolutely correct. For the last 3-4 years, our commission has been quite transactional. It'll be exactly IOPS will be a piece of work you'll undertake. Now, the ambition and a growing, I think, support internally to make certain we don't commission in a transactional way. We transaction across the entirety of a pathway. I think Penny described it perfectly yesterday, actually, that through this commission hub, where all parts of the ICB come together, we will commission for all age elective and all age mental health rather than segments, basically. And that's going to take an honest conversation around our capability and capacity to undertake that. But that is certainly our ambition. And I said that's, I think, in terms of the executive team, I think that's been received very, very positively.
Which I think is great, but there's still, the whole pathway model assumes that things will stay on a pathway, and if you don't commission it, it doesn't go anywhere else. I think it has to be more sophisticated than that in terms of monitoring the unintended consequences. For example, we have withdrawn, or we've changed provider for audiology. What are the unintended consequences for primary care of that? That wouldn't be looked at in the actual commissioning, but I can tell you it's been very significant.
Can I just ask, invite Peter to just come in on it, and I'll ask Libby to come in as well. Peter.
So, Frank, obviously I would agree with everything that you said, and I think I would point towards the work that Penny has particularly led on the EQIA process, which is inherently part of any of these investment or disinvestment discussions, which specifically allow us to drill down on what can we predict the unforeseen consequences will be, recognising that by definition unforeseen we may not be able to do that, but how we will monitor impact. And I think, again, with a more dynamic EQIA process, we will be able to look at the consequences further down the line in any disinvestment.
And Libby?
I was just going to make a suggestion, Chair, that given I think we were going to plan some board seminar time around the performance management, that we actually in the round look at the commissioning plan and the connections between those and some of these issues as part of that board seminar time.
Yeah, well, let's make a note of that, and we can look into that. So I've got Lincoln, Alison, Graham, and Sam, and then perhaps we'll try and sum up this this item. Lincoln.
Thanks. I wanted to comment on the priorities for 25-26 around delivering equitable services, which really good to see that as giving that pride of place. I note that we have the EQIA in place. There are quite some chunky actions around inclusion health groups and vulnerable groups. The challenge we've always had is the collection of data, particularly on protected characteristics and other stuff that gives us actionable data and how we're using that. What progress have we made so that as a board, we can begin to see performance broken down as appropriate by some of these key categories, some of the geographies we will know, so to some extent, the coastal, rural, but there are those hidden bits, as you would imagine, that we've not been. It's not just us, it's been a national problem. I wanted to tease that out a bit, thanks.
Thanks, Lincoln. Would you like to respond to that, Libby? Or John?
Good. Yeah, so I think it's a really, really good challenge, and one that we have to grow to be able to meet that. I'll give an example of that. In terms of the work in the equitable services around our implementation of NICE guidance, the opinion of whether to take something forward is based on people's experience and knowledge, actually, rather than data. Now, we're going to take a test paper to the commissioning group in a few weeks' time, basically. What sort of challenges that? Because data should inform everything we do, whatever aspect it is, actually, because that's not always the case at this moment in time, actually. So I said it's a good point, certainly built into what we expect to be doing from the Commission Hub and the Commission Plan going forward. That's just an example of not taking people's views. What our Commission needs to be based on the highest quality of data that we have. Is that answering your question? Yeah.
I'd like to just invite Peter to come into this conversation as well, please.
I mean, Lincoln, you're right, we're not where we need to be. I think that the ICB, future ICB blueprint is very clear that we need to develop and grow our capabilities in that population health space to understand how we link our data sets and use them more effectively. The question will be whether, at what level and what scale that is done to provide the best outcome for the most efficient delivery mechanism. And I think that some of this afternoon's discussion, I'm sure, iteratively, we'll be able to better define that.
Thanks, Peter. Penny, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, so briefly, so Lincoln, part of the quality impact assessment process has been a training mandate to train all staff within the ICB. And part of that is to ensure that we have foundation level competency around understanding the importance of data. So not only are we an insightful board, we're an insightful commissioner. Now that has revealed, because that's providing us with baseline information about training needs going forward. And certainly that's something we have been looking to further develop. One of the things that is really helpful, I think, about DATIX, coming back to Frank's point. So we record now our quality impact assessments electronically in a system that allows us to search. Because we know that people with protected characteristics or those that are particularly disadvantaged are small in terms of numbers of the population, but have high need and high impact on the use of resources. So what it allows us to do for the very first time actually is to look at the extent of our programmes, schemes and intentions to make sure that we do thematic analysis.
Thank you, Penny. Lincoln, has your question been answered to your satisfaction? Thank you. Let's now move to Alison, and I've got Graham and Sam, and then we'll try and sum up this item. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Two things, if I may. The first one, I think, is implicit in the paper, that in terms of performance management, there are other people outside of the system who've also got a stake in this. So just thinking about how the tiering meetings link in with your escalation framework, how whatever the future regional oversight meeting will be, which would replace SIAG, fits with the escalation framework, and also the internal trust's own escalation processes when they're off track. And I appreciate this is sort of, this is an iterative process, but in terms of avoiding duplication and making best use of the same data and same reporting, I just wonder if there would be a way that that could all just sort of be connected up so that we can be sure that, well, if UEC is being done weekly through the tiering process, that this process would take the weekly UEC tiering process and use that as part of its own escalation. That's just an example. And particularly some might have a view on this, the internal escalation, how that connects together. So it would be useful to just connect that all up, I think, in the next iteration of this. That was the first point. And the second point was just on the dashboards, which I think it's really helpful to have an at-a-glance dashboard. Just wondered whether it's worth calling on some expertise from Sam Riley and the Making Data Count team, which I can put you into contact with, because they've got really good tools using perhaps more sophisticated data and processes than just a RAG rating, using SPC charts and other things that will give you better trend analysis and give you sort of better reconciliation to trajectories, because it's not just it's not just where am I, but it's where am I compared to where I was planning to be. And that just might be a helpful resource for the team. They might be able to do some of that work for you, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Alison. Libby?
Yeah, thank you, Alison. I think both of those suggestions are great. We are currently doing some work looking at the wider connections with other things so that we have one version of the truth and that we're making sure that all of that aligns. So I think we are doing some work. We can test that back in the next iteration. And yeah, I'm always open to access any expertise and support that we can have. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Libby. Graham?
Thank you. I'd like to ask about looking outside Devon's borders in relation to the commissioning hub. So it's in our title, integration. There are currently 42 integrated care boards. Integration sounds really simple, but of course it is the complexity, and as Frank points out, the robustness of connecting things up. I've always taken the view that one of the core things the ICB needs to think about is organisation boundaries where they happen to be to enable joined up pathways. I think pathways are really important for patients to be effective, and also they tend to be the most efficient. So I think the commissioning hub is a really, really important thing to as it were, finally deliver our ambition of improving health and social care here. So are we doing that ourselves? Are we able to look outside? Is there anybody we think's got best practice to help us deliver that? Because I think that's a really fundamental thing if we can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and absolutely just provide that assurance that we're looking as broadly as we can in terms of good and bad experiences, because I think you can learn from both. So it will be based on a broad look at where different examples and different sort of successes, etc., have been. So yeah, we are doing that. Thank you.
Thanks. So I've now got Sam and then Salma. Sam.
Thanks, Chair. Two quick points. One is I'll be really keen to do some work with John outside of the meeting on the section on MIUs. So this issue came up with questions from members of the public at my board yesterday regarding the future of the MIU in Ilfracombe. And I think we just need to do some work about how do we engage with the public about the future of those services, particularly for some of our more remote geographies. The second point I just wanted to make was, I think perhaps with Penny we need to do some work with the providers and engage with the CQC. So this came up at the meeting Mark and I was at first thing. I understand why, but I'm uncomfortable about us using CQC ratings in our dashboards some of which look like are now 6 years old. The latest one we've got is getting on for 2 years old. So I know that is a common national issue, but given we're in NOF4 and RSP, you would think we could lobby the CQC to perhaps prioritise us.
Thanks, Sam. Do you want to respond to that,
Yeah.
Penny?
This is a topical discussion and came up at our system quality group with the CQC there. Obviously, they've been going through a period of reorganisation, but there has been heavy reliance historically on taking their inspection ratings into our own quality, I would say, improvement approach. But there are significant limitations. I think there is still some relevance because are those issues still live? Yeah. That is a question that needs to be asked. But I think we need to reduce the reliance on those inspection ratings.
Thank you, Penny. And finally, Salma.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one from me. It's with regard to the CIP programmes. When we were signing off the operating plan, we recognised the significant risk around the CIP programmes. And my question was really just to see what progress or plans are in place to, make sure that the CIP programmes have actually been identified. There's still a significant gap in the number of those. And secondly, I recall that there were a number of CIPs, particularly around the workforce, where the plans were backloaded and they were coming in at the time of winter. And we talked about some of how we could mitigate some of that risk and also the then ensuing risk around it being too late to take corrective actions. And I just wondered where in the piece of work you're doing, Libby, that we're making progress on that and we can kind of identify the level of residual risks in that.
Should I pick up on the first parts of that? So we've gone on to weekly monitoring of SIP schemes. So all the trusts and the ICB submit where they are with their SIP schemes in terms of maturity of the scheme. So this is whether, how well they're progressing and whether they're identified. So we can see the shift is going in the right place. Because one of the metrics we've got is by month 4, there shouldn't be any that are unidentified. They should all have the start of plans, if not robust plans behind them. So we've gone on to the weekly monitoring. We've also been working with the region and the RSP teams. They've gone in and done a full 2-day review of Torbay's SIP schemes. There's one programmed for RDUH end of next week, I think it is, might be Thursday or Friday, where again a similar type review is going to be done to test the robustness of the reporting and the deliverability, and so we've got a real feel for what the risk level is on the SIPs, and then we will do that for the remaining trusts as well. It's a programme of work that we're going to do jointly with the region. So there is a lot of focus going into that area because we know that was a really high risk area around the deliverability. You're correct. Some of the phasing is backloaded and a lot of that is to do with the workforce, and some of it was predicated on whether there would be redundancy funding available, which we still don't know about. So there is those unknowns that we've not been able to deal with yet. But in terms of how that links in with winter, I might just ask Libby or John to say if there's been any. I think a lot of the workforce reductions will be in the corporate areas rather than the clinical areas anyway. So it's in terms of delivery of winter services, shouldn't have a massive impact. But I don't know if we've done a direct assessment against workforce reductions and deliverability in that sense.
We haven't, Bessie, but that seems incredibly sensible as part of winter planning, which begins almost immediately. So we can take that away as an action. Happy to do that.
Thank you, Salma. Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, John. So let's move to the... I'm sorry, Graham, I missed you, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. I paced my 3 questions, so apologies. Can I just make sure we understand what we're seeing in the appendix, please? Because I'm not quite sure I understand what the RAG ratings are, but as I'm reading it, under the column that's red rated, which means the contracts are not deliverable, the grand total is £2.19 billion, as opposed to the amber, which is 16 million, and the green, which is 21 million. should I be worried about that?
It's what the red means there is actually is being able to deal in year on that because of the contractual arrangements. So in terms of the acute services actually is we have set a contract for this year. So our ability to impact financially in year is limited. Now that's for this year. That doesn't mean going forward we have it, but this is to focus on the art of the possible and where we can make those financial benefits in year. So the amber and green are in focus because we can do that. There's no contractual barriers to doing that. But we think of in terms of the acute service, we have agreed contracts. There isn't an in-year process actually to change those.
Okay.
Did you want to come back on the point, Graham? You're sounding sceptical.
Well, it feeds into the SIP question, doesn't it? If a large chunk of our funds cannot be changed in year, how do we achieve the SIPs? I guess it's how do you mesh them together?
Yeah. So hopefully, Chris can come in with it. Those SIPs are built into those contracts. So we have, so it's X for SIP investment, savings, etc. Changing those in year would sort of have a negative impact on our financial plan in year. Yes. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Kirsty? Okay, thank you. Did you have another question, Graham? No. Okay, so thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for all the work that's gone on the operational plan for 25-26. It's been a significant amount of work that's gone in from everybody, from the teams at the ICB and also across the system. So thank you for that. There's a suggestion that we build in some board seminar time around the commissioning plan, the connections, but there's just some other issues that I think have been raised that might be useful to touch on in such a seminar. The decommissioning schedule, we're told it's a live document. It might just be worth spending a bit of time understanding some of that. Pace and action in terms of the interventions where escalation is needed. Again, I think it would be good to just have a conversation in a seminar setting on that, and we've acknowledged the need to grow capability in the public health space and population health to meet the new ICB blueprint. So it'd be good, I think, to take some of that discussion into seminar time at some point as well. So let's make a note of that, and we'll try and schedule that as we're drawing up the plan for development time for the board over the next few months. So we have some recommendations. We're asked to note the level of ambition and risk within the submitted operational plan for 25-26. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. We're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the proposed approach to performance management in 25-26, including confirmation of the metrics that will be included in the performance management dashboard. Are we happy to take satisfactory assurance on that? Thank you. And we're asked to endorse the NHS Devon commissioning plan for delivery in 25-26. Are we happy to endorse the commissioning plan? Thank you very much. We stay with you, Libby, for item 4.2, which is annual plan 25-26 next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'll take the paper as read, but just to pull out a few key points. So obviously the NHS Devon annual plan at the moment details the 17 strategic objectives that we've committed to deliver in 25-26, and these were approved by the board in March. This paper particularly describes a revised approach to monitoring and reporting on the progress of that annual plan. I think what colleagues will have seen that we made some great progress last year in terms of standardising and reporting assurance through the committees on last year's annual plan. We've taken a lot of learning from that and we've refined that going into this year. So there will be a process put in, or there is a process having been put in place that replaces the approach last year with highlight reports through to the relevant committees and board. However, it's important to note as part of this paper that obviously with the release of the model ICB blueprint and ICB reconfigurations, this obviously needs us to revisit the annual planning objectives and to look at prioritising and focusing on the key areas of the annual plan within that context. So we are undertaking a review at the moment of the impact of the model ICB and reconfiguration on our annual plan with a agreement that we will bring that through the committees and through to board in July for agreement. So it's just within that context. Obviously, this paper is very much around the new approach to reporting, but the plan itself may need to be adapted within the current context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Libby. Any observations or questions for Libby on the annual plan 25-26 next steps? Graham.
The Appendix 1 references alignment to Darcy shifts. The Darcy reviews, I knew it was in large part an audit to be followed on by detail as to what to do about it. The middle one, analogue to digital, is not something we really talked about at board that much of late. And my understanding is that in the prioritisation of funds, actually, for better or worse, some of the digital programmes are being scaled back. So is there a danger that we're making an assumption of alignment to something that may be really hard to achieve? Thank you.
I'm not sure whether Kirsty may want to come in, particularly on investments, but I think absolutely it's within the context of the challenging sort of financial position that we're in. The planning objectives, as you're aware, went through a really rigorous process to agree those 17 planning objectives at the board in March. I think within the context that we have now, we absolutely need to revisit that and make sure that we're prioritising the right areas. So I think it is a really challenging time to consider how we balance all those priorities. I don't know whether Kirsty may want to come in on the specific issue around investment in digital.
Can I invite Peter to come in first, and then Peter?
I guess, Graham, I'd want to make the point, I suppose, that we've already invested quite heavily in digital in terms of particularly our acute providers and their new EPR with Epic. And so for me, it isn't necessarily about new investment. It is about making sure that we leverage the maximum benefits of the investments we've already made, which can be the focus if there is a limited financial pot to draw from.
Thanks, Peter. That's helpful. And Sam, did you want to come in on that?
Well, just to say, absolutely to agree with Peter's point, Graham, the priority in the acute sector must be to get maximum value for money out of the Epic investment. Actually, I think we've got a really exciting story we can tell. What we're currently trying to do is roll out ambient voice technology at the RDUH, and then the plan will be to cascade that to the other two acute providers. I think we may have the most ambitious digital transformation plan in that area in the whole of the country. So if we can pull it off, we've then got something to shout about, recognising that is very siloed in the acute sector, and we've got to then work out how do we work across everywhere, don't we?
Thank you. So I'm going to bring Steve in and then Tandy.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is really good to see the work going on with EPR and some of the stuff that Sam's mentioned. As part of our strategy development, we've got to be clear, and I think what we've lacked in the past is what is our ambition around wider digital transformation, which is much about out of hospital, population health, and a whole range of other things, so that we end up with a set of enablers that realise those ambitions for us. We haven't had that before. At the moment, as we sit here today, I don't know how we're going to be able to develop that at the speed we need to, but it's something that's absolutely got to be done alongside the strategy, as well as the sort of workforce transformation and the infrastructure stuff, because otherwise we've just got a piece of paper setting out ambitions and no way of being able to deliver it. So I think, Graham, I would acknowledge the kind of the philosophical point behind what you said, which is there is much more to digital transformation than we're currently doing, albeit we're being really ambitious, and there's a huge programme around Epic. We've got to take a step back and decide what it is we're achieving, what we need to achieve over the medium term as part of our strategic intent, and that's the work we need to focus on.
Thanks, Steve. Tandy.
So mine is have a question, but also have an observation. And I'm asking this in the context of quite a number of things that we're trying to grapple with here, which is 1, the annual plan, 2, the operating plan, 3, the model ICB imperatives, and then you've got the strategy development. Are you across, I know you're probably, it's easier to think of those things as one thing at a time, but one of the things that we were supposed to do when we were set up as an ICB is to stimulate systems working within Devon. And I'm not very sure that we ever got to a point where that could completely start going, in a sense that you would say a lot of things that we're doing are in a system way. And if you think about the model ICB paper, the boundaries and things are going to change. So my question or point to you is it possible that as you're thinking of all of those 5 things, or as you're thinking about strategic commissioning, stimulating systems working becomes part of that? Because I think that's probably one of the things that will be lost in the end. And I think that will be really important to start thinking about that right now. So we're doing it as part of all of these changes. So when we arrive, if we do arrive, that's already part of it, rather than we do it at the end.
Thanks, Tandy. Libby, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah.
And then I'll invite Stephen.
So yeah, hopefully, which is I think why at the beginning where I said it, although you've got 3 papers in this section, it's really difficult to talk about them separately because they are so intrinsically connected. And we've spent a lot of time as an executive looking at how all of those things come together so that we can take a really holistic view. Just coming back to Steve's point, I think there's a huge opportunity absolutely within the development of the health and care strategy within that context of the wider system thinking. It's absolutely key, Tandy. Mm-hmm.
Steve?
Yeah, really interesting question, one that's kind of been on our mind, even if it's sort of slightly implicit in everything that we're doing at the moment. In thinking about how we rapidly develop strategy, it forces us to be really clear about how we're going to do that as a system. This isn't and never was in my mind something where we sit in a dark room and we write something. So it's forcing us, for example, to think about what exactly is the role of the collaboratives in helping us with that, what's the role of sovereign organisations helping us with that, but also some of the really obvious gaps that we've got. So how do we get a really strong voice for VCSE in strategy, in considering strategy for primary care, as challenging as that is, because it's getting one voice is difficult in that environment. Community care, there's a whole bunch of gaps, and one of the things we need to do, we're in the process of doing now, is filling those gaps and thinking about how do we create a strategic space where the system comes together, everyone who has a part to play in people's health and well-being, to help us develop that strategy. So I think it's a really good point. And when we change the boundaries, actually we do have the benefits of some of the collaboratives, for example, already being on a peninsular footprint. So we've got to build on that, but there's a lot to do quite rapidly to get that right. I think that's going to be a really key part of how the new ICBs work and how we manage and develop a market, particularly right down at that neighbourhood level, to deliver what we know we're going to need to deliver through that sort of strategic intent. So we'll watch this space, but I think there is a lot of thinking going on that at the moment.
Thanks, Steve. Penny?
Such a helpful question. So multiple drivers happening in our context at the moment, some of which are aligned, some aren't. And I think one of the benefits, however, is that it's acting as a catalyst for us to really push into the health and care strategy. The key issue here is that it's non-reactive, rather that it's responsive, that it sets pace, that is helpful, that galvanises rather than drives people apart. So, and I think that's really the real opportunity here. And I think what we shouldn't lose sight of is the people that we serve need to inform that work, so the population, but also making sure we've got the right health and care engagement is absolutely fundamental. So we need to go promptly but thoughtfully. So thank you.
Thanks, Penny. So final comment on this to Mary, please.
I think what I need to be sort of emphasising is that the role of scrutiny, the role of the health and wellbeing boards in all of this, you need to be taking the population and local government with you, and so I think that just asks you to remember that as it's no good just going to the leaders of the councils, etc. You need to go to the working parts of the council.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mary. That's really helpful, and actually, let's just note that in the minutes, the importance of the role of scrutiny and health and wellbeing boards. So thank you, Mary, for that. Let's move to the recommendation here then. Under Annual Plan 25-26, next steps are we're recommended to take satisfactory assurance from the approach to delivering the 25-26 NHS Devon Annual Plan as described in the report. Are we happy to take satisfactory assurance? Thank you very much. We'll stay with Libby. We will have a short break after this next item, but we'll stay with you for item 4.3, Libby, which is developing NHS Devon's healthcare strategy.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. So again, I'll take the paper as read, but just a few key points. So the development of our health and care strategy will form the cornerstone of our joint forward plan. So it's really key to be clear about that, and that it will align with the priorities of the NHS long-term plan. As part of developing our fully integrated planning process, the development of our health and care strategy, as we've heard in the discussions to date, is absolutely key in terms of informing future years' planning objectives and commissioning intentions. What the health and care strategy will do will define an end state informed by national priorities, including what we've already referenced in the previous paper around the 3 shifts and the long-term plan. Key for us in Devon, it's ensuring that the health and care strategy addresses current areas of unsustainability within the health and care system, and removing our reliance on both deficit support and addressing our distance from target. And therefore the strategy to be developed will deliver our refreshed medium-term financial plan within that context as well. The strategy will be defined across 6 key areas that are set out within the paper, absolutely focused through the lens of population health and prevention, and supporting people within their communities and homes. We have commenced the Discover phase around the health and care strategy development, and with the expectation of bringing the outputs to the board in June. And the design of the strategy will be done in partnership with stakeholders, provider collaborators, as we've already mentioned in terms of our approach to engagement. The final strategy will be presented to the board in September, and then subsequently obviously will inform the development of our commissioning intentions going forward from 26-27 onwards. So on that note, Chair, happy to take any comments or queries.
Thanks, Libby. Sam.
Thanks, Chair. Libby, I thought this was a really good paper in terms of setting out the framework. I think for me, we just need to unpack paragraph 3 a little bit, where it talks about delivering in line with the MTFP. My understanding is that the deficit support funding will be either fully or significantly withdrawn in 26-27. And therefore, I think we need to have an urgent conversation with those organisations currently running deficits about what that means for their ability to continue to provide services. And we've got to get on the front foot on that literally within the next few weeks because of the scale of the financial changes that we'll have to make. So I just wanted to bring that urgency into the conversation because we are talking about significant service change pretty quickly to deliver the scale of financial saving we're talking about.
Thanks. Do you want to respond to that point, Alison? Thank you.
So it was the same point I would like to make. It is the affordability issue that needs to come through very, very strongly in this, and unashamedly, because this is about a strategy that delivers clinical sustainability, but also financial sustainability for Devon. And I think that particularly in terms of the clinical engagement, that being front and centre as a primary objective, I think needs to be made very, very clear. The only thing I would say, Sam, in response to your point, is that it's not just the organisations that are currently posting a deficit, because service change affects everybody, doesn't it? Because whatever you do in one part of the system has a significant impact on the other. So it is that collective discussion. And I will just lighten the mood a moment, Chair, that I had to read this a couple of times last night, because where it talked about delivering the strategy payer functions, every time I read it, I saw prayer. I thought, why are they saying prayer functions in this? It's actually maybe that's the subliminal messages.
Thanks, Alison. Steve, would you like to respond to that point? And then I've got Graham and Salma.
Yeah, I think divine intervention or inspiration might be needed in all of this. Yeah, just to pick up Sam's specific point. So I think for me there are two elements to this, and I think it demonstrates the need to go at the speed that Sam's saying. One is we need to be able to describe how we're going to get all of the system of Devon aligned within the rightful level of funding that the funding formula says, which goes beyond the deficit funding. It's in that much larger figure, actually about 160 odd million distance from target, and we need to develop a plan that's very clear about what that looks like. However, in the short term, added to that, we have to also get organisations back to the point where they do not require deficit support funding. So we need to do both of those things in parallel. I think the trick in all of this, and partly the reason why we're trying to rush at this strategy, is to ensure that any decisions we make are both informed by and don't cut across what might be the larger strategic intent. Although I think we'd need to acknowledge today there may be some risk of that, given the scale of financial impact that we need to feel next year. So I think that's a very live issue at the moment, and I think over the next couple of weeks we've got to get much more clear about what that looks like and the degree of alignment with long term. But the sooner we do that, it fits a bit with the point around keeping on plan this year. The easier next year becomes to stay on that financial trajectory that we're going to set out.
Thanks, Sam, Alison, Steve. So I've got Graham, Salma, Lincoln and Kay. Graham first, please.
Thank you. So there are some characteristics of a good strategy around insight, understanding, the quality dimensions, the buy-in, the doability of it, the triangulation of various complex elements. The timelines to do this are pretty darn tight, and it includes a piece of discovery, which I sort of rather hope we by and large know by now what Devon looks like. But when you overlay this on other programmes and structural changes and clustering, is there not a risk that the quality of the strategy is actually eroded? Something might have to give, and I'm just nervous about what do we do to ensure that this is a quality strategy, not a piece of paper that looks good and can't be delivered?
Thanks, Graham. I'll invite Steve to respond to that.
Yeah, another really important question, and one that we have reflected on as a team, because for all of the reasons you said, this is a really challenging time to be writing strategy and to do it in the timescales we've said. My view is that we had the absence of strategy for too long. I'm not quite saying that any strategy will do, but having clearer strategic intent, even if we've got to continue to develop that over time, is a really important first step. So I think if I had to describe this, we're probably going to get to the bones of something which will then need to be more fully fleshed out over time. I think we'll get the bones of it right because we know broadly, as you've said from the discovery stuff, we know broadly what the big issues are. But I've always seen strategy as not so much a piece of paper or a single point in time, but as an ongoing process to effectively look beyond the short term and ensure that we're staying on track in the long term. Some of you will remember the boat I put up before Christmas as my analogy for that. I guess the other part to acknowledge in all of this is whilst we are motoring on this, there will come a moment relatively soon where we'll need to mesh it with Cornwall's strategy potentially. So there's also that dynamic that we need to manage. I don't think any of that undermines the importance of doing what we've set out. It's just acknowledging that it's the start of something that arguably we should have been doing for years, and we're going to need to continue on whatever the organisational change is.
Thanks, Steve. Salma.
Thanks, Chair. Libby, thank you. It sets out really helpfully the national direction of travel, and that helpfully concurs with our own thinking. Just a couple of points. I'm really pleased that you used the word health and care strategy, but I noted the document uses the two terms interchangeably. So it's healthcare strategy at the beginning, and then it dips in and out into health and care, and I think it's important we get that consistent. My main point was the one around people, though. So I'm aware that there are going to be some changes to the ICB's functional role around workforce planning, so I get that. But I'm thinking more about some of the models of care. So when we've set out the 3 left shifts, there's going to be an important people element to those. So commissioning the right model of care, market management, shaping the provider supply side, all of those things will require quite an important people dimension. And even if others were then to commission that on our behalf, the strategic intent still needs to signal very clearly what that shift is in terms of primary care. The kinds of skill sets that we'll be looking for will then influence the commissioning, new types of nursing careers, apprenticeships, all sorts of things, you know, all sorts of kind of digital input, etc. So I think there's nothing at all around people in here at all, and I think we just need to pick that up, even if it's to say our role in that is developing, and we'll kind of need to do that as we go along.
Steve.
Yeah, I'll come in on. I think for me, firstly, the purpose of the strategy is to try and set out that strategic intent about where we want, where we see services being delivered, and that's done with all the voices around the room helping us with that. In order to make that strategy come to life, you have to have 3 pillars underpinning it, the sort of enabling things. One of them is the infrastructure and, you know, where your buildings and equipment and all of that stuff is. The second, as we referred to earlier, that what's the digital component with all of this, particularly with the falling workforce and the new opportunities around digital beyond things like EPR. The third bit is, which is just as important, if not more, because of the lead times quite often in developing new training and getting people through the pipeline, is what's the workforce that's then required in the future end state, and starting to work on that today. So those 3 things are going to need to very quickly follow. It won't be in serial in reality, but the closer we get to landing the initial strategy, the more work we would have then done on thinking about those 3 enabling elements, because those are the things that actually make the strategy work for us, and those are the things that as a board we'd want to see and be assured about we've got our thinking right on.
Libby, I suppose I just want to come back to the question, which, as I heard it, was, you know, do we need to amend this strategy to incorporate the workforce priorities that we have? I think was what Salma was asking.
Yes,
to put on the microphone, Salma, thank you.
Yes, because I think the 2 things kind of work in tandem. So if we say we're developing the strategy and then we'll bring the enablers in, that's very logical and sensible, and that's how we tend to do things. But actually, if you're looking at the shape of the people dimension, let me just say, within Devon, the kind of the population, age profile, all of those sorts of things, perhaps the educational levels, we may need to look at that as part of shaping the strategy rather than as responding to the delivery of the strategy. I think it was that I was trying to get across.
Yes, yeah, apologies. So there are going to be a set of, if I can put it this way, design constraints in all of this. There's no point just writing a strategy without any link to reality, and some of that will be absolutely about our demographics, about our local population. It'll also be about the state of our infrastructure and other things as well. Those will be things that we need to ensure that we are addressing, either acknowledging, because you can't change them, or the strategy does something to address them. In doing that, we will then end up, through these 3 enabling supports, we'll be much more confident that we can deliver on those, because we've recognised the constraints in our system to be able to do them. So it is sort of, for me, there is a logical flow to this, but you have to start, and the discovery report will set out what are our design constraints, what is it that we're actually dealing with as a system right now, in order for that strategy to address those things.
Okay, so on this point, I think I've got Libby and Sam, and then I'll come back to Lincoln and Kay afterwards. So Libby.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from what Steve was saying, I think that is the absolute key importance of a Discover piece, no matter how how briefly or how quickly we need to do that is that it sets out that case for change, that those challenges that we've got around people, demographics, workforce, whatever. So that is absolutely what the design of the strategy is based on. The other thing, just around some assurance that although in terms of implementing the strategy, absolutely those enablers are key, but right now we have already stood up an enabling group that is sort of sitting alongside the work that we're doing around the strategy, so that we're preempting and starting to think about that at this stage as well. So it's just to provide that assurance that we're not doing it. It's just obviously we're trying to get ahead of the game a bit with that as well.
Thank you, Libby. Sam?
Thanks, Chair. And it links to Sam's point, but also what Steve was saying as well. So increasingly, as we try and make this proof, given we're going to end up in a conversation with Devon and Cornwall, we need to be thinking about place, which then links to the workforce point. So just think we need a bit of a place theme in there, Libby, that I'm not quite sure we've got yet.
Thank you, Sam. Lincoln and then Kay, and then we'll try and draw this item to a close. Lincoln.
Thanks. Two brief points I wanted to highlight. One was about the role of the VCSE and the tension that is inherent there, because as you read about pair functions and market, and I was thinking pair functions about pay for service. That was interesting that my mind went there. But it's interesting that sometimes we get these situations where the VCSE cannot compete with a view of how we want to commission at scale and that kind of stuff, and how we build that working with our voluntary sector, the assembly, to understand what fits so that we don't lose key building blocks for moving to community and the neighborhood approach, that inadvertently we end up, especially when we're dealing with such larger geographies, that we miss the smaller scale. And the other point is about how do we support our local economy through our commissioning and procurement, and where do we find those situations where there is good value locally and we are not driven by algorithms and other stuff just to go with the large agencies, this massive sucking that sends a lot of our provision to London and elsewhere, for example. Thanks.
Thank you, Lincoln. Okay, and finally, in this section, Kay, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just reflecting on our last medium-term financial plan and what we could learn from that. And so we've already acknowledged that finance is going to be critical in affordability. So there's something for me about we potentially can't wait until we know what the national numbers are. So therefore we've got to make a set of prudent assumptions, I would suggest. And then the next part of that for me is, and maybe do we need to do some scenarios? So my reflection on the medium-term financial plan last time was things moved a bit and suddenly we were out of where we thought we were going to be. So let's think about what the possible range of the financial parameters are that we're going to be working within. And then hopefully when things are clearer nationally, we'll be within that range, but we won't be suddenly blown off course because something's moved a bit.
It's a helpful point. Okay, thank you. So we've asked to note the urgency and need for rapid strategy development. I think we've talked quite a bit about the urgency in this meeting. We've talked about this being about clinical and financial sustainability across Devon. We've talked about affordability needing to run through it. So I think the urgency we've had the conversation around. So hopefully we're happy to note the urgency of the need for a rapid strategy development here, and we're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the proposed timeline and governance as outlined in the report. Okay. I think we should just also flag up that final point from Kay actually around medium-term financial plan and not waiting for the national numbers and some different scenarios to be modelled, so that we've got some options as we get into the autumn. Graham, final point then on this.
Just to emphasise that, I mean, there's a comprehensive spending review which is going to come out about now, actually. And I think the expectation is the 10-year plan will actually be 3 plus a 7. So I think that's absolutely right. We'll have to give some flexibility because the timings don't quite work for us.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I suggest we now take a break. Can we take a 10-minute break and come back around 11:35? Thank you very much. If we could pause the live stream. Okay, welcome back to the second part of the board meeting, everybody. We're now into section 5 of the agenda, which is the Governance, Performance and Assurance Report, and I'd like to invite Philippa to take us into item 5.1, which is the Board Assurance Framework. Thanks, Philippa.
Thank you. So the Board Assurance Framework Report sets out a proposed change to the approach that was agreed at the last board meeting. Board members will recall when the annual plan was presented to the board in March, we also presented a plan suggesting that we should be linking our board assurance framework with the 17 overarching objectives that are set out in the annual plan. We've had conversations about this at various committee meetings through April and May, and I think as evidenced by the previous discussion around the annual plan, there was a general feeling that we needed to do a little bit more work in terms of looking at those overarching objectives, and also recognising the fact that we'll be doing the work on the strategy as well that we've just been discussing. So the report proposes that rather than trying to put the cart before the horse, we should return to the approach that we had in 24-25 in terms of the BAF for essentially the first 6 months of the year, which relates to the NOF, but with a couple of additional risks which are specifically in relation to the work that's required of us to reduce the ICB running costs and the challenges that have been identified in light of the delivering of the business as usual activities in 25-26. And then we propose that as we have the conversations around the development of the strategy and we also bring into that the context of risk appetite and the thinking about the risk to the achievement of those strategic objectives. So that is essentially a summary of the report.
Thank you, Philippa. Any questions or observations for Philippa? Frank?
I completely understand the logic about we were going to change it. We've now, it does make sense to do so. But if we are leaving it the same, given the conversations that we've had earlier, the scoring of finance and use of resources and people, I'm just wondering whether that needs to be flagged at this point and raised, or whether we feel that the scoring is adequate for the next 6 months.
Thanks, Philippa.
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't propose that we would be looking to keep the same score for the whole of the next 6 months, and I would suggest that the board remits this to the board assurance committees that are due to meet in the next week, 2 weeks, I think, to have a look at this in detail, and then we can take it back through the executive committee before presentation to the board in July.
Thanks, Philippa. Anyone else have any questions for Philippa? If not, then we're asked to approve the revised proposed approach to the Board Assurance Framework for the first 2 quarters of 25-26. Philippa's just confirmed that we will submit this to the Board Assurance Committees so that the ratings can be reviewed and brought back to the board. So that the ratings won't stay the same for the duration of the 2 quarters. Is everyone happy to approve that? Secondly, we're asked to approve the addition of 2 new risks in relation to ICB transition to the Board Assurance Framework, and those relate specifically to the reduction of ICB running costs and to the delivery of business as usual activities. Are we happy to approve the addition of those 2 risks? Thank you, they are approved. And finally, we're asked to approve the 25-26 Board Assurance Framework risk to achieving the strategic objectives of NHS Devon. Are we happy to approve? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 5.2, which is NHS Devon 24-25 Annual Plan Delivery Assurance Close Down Report, and I'll invite Libby to present that to us. Thanks, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper presents the closing report as we came to the end of 24-25 and details the review that the Programme Management Office in the ICB has concluded of the annual plan for 24-25. I think it's important to note that this was the first annual plan that the organisation had developed for some time. And contrary to the 17 strategic objectives contained in this year's annual plan that the board signed off in March. Within this plan for 24-25, there were 130 objectives in total at different levels. And I think last year really marked a significant change in our approach to providing assurance around those objectives to committees and the board on a monthly basis. And the introduction of standard process and standard reporting, I think was a key step forward. But I think it was recognised that moving into 25-26, that the number of objectives needed to be rationalised, and hence the new approach to the annual plan this year. So within the report, you'll see that all objectives have now either been closed, been transferred into business as usual within the organisation as part of key team work plans and objectives, or have been mapped through into 25-26 planning objectives so that we can reference that and show the continuation into there. The other thing to note is that within the paper, it does set out a number of achievements as part of the delivery of the annual plan in 24-25, which I think it's important for the board to note today. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Libby. Are there any questions for Libby on the annual plan close down report? Okay. Oh, sorry, Steve. Yeah.
It's not a question. To really to know, just to inform the board, I'm using this report as part of the appraisal process for all of the executives, which is now underway, having done my first one this week. So I am strongly of the view that the objectives of the executives should be the objectives we've set out within the plan, rather than being a separate thing, and we'll continue to use that approach going forward. So I'll be, as I say, formally reviewing that, and we'll have the paperwork available for the committee when we need it.
Thank you, Steve. So thanks for the report, Libby. We've been informed that all objectives are either closed, transferred to business as usual, or mapped into the 25-26 objectives. Is the board happy to agree the final positions of assurance for each directorate at the 24-25 year end? Thank you very much. Then we've agreed those positions. Let's move on now to item 5.3, which is mental health assertive and intensive outreach action plan update, and I'll invite Peter to take us into this agenda item. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm grateful to our mental health commissioning team for providing the content of this report, and indeed our providers for contributing to the work that it describes. So the board will remember earlier in the year I bought a report of our stock take following the Valdo Calacane case, which was a national stock take looking at all systems, excuse me, monitoring and support to those who have suffered a serious mental illness and return to the community and find it difficult to engage with mental health services for their follow-up. We, following that stock take, committed to do a series of improvements which are described, the progress which is described within the report. I'll assume that the report is read. This is assurance that we are delivering progress, already picked up through our subcommittees and our system quality group, that what is lacking at the moment is some description of the numbers of how we're monitoring progress and how we're monitoring impact, and we will bring that back to a further report, and that will be reported through the mental health delivery groups that we have set up. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Peter. Salma.
Thanks, Peter. I wasn't here when you presented the work last time, so apologies if I'm asking you to talk about things that you've already covered. But it was just really with regards to assurance. So I think the first element you've already recognised, excuse me, around metrics, the lack of metrics. So how do we actually measure that we're doing what we set out to do, or indeed our providers are doing what they've agreed to do? But more importantly, the triangulation of some of our work with some of the key committees and providers, so in particular the mental health legislation committees. Some of the metrics there act as really useful proxies for us, as well as tell us directly about compliance with things such as the Mental Health Capacity Act, deprivation of liberties, and all things that are relevant to this particular vulnerable group of people. And I just wondered whether we'd done some of that work and whether that correlated with our own assessment of where we were at as a system, as well as each of the two mental health providers.
And thanks. So I reflect my desire to be helpful needs to be balanced against not giving you false assurance. So I'd need to go back to the original report, and I'm happy to go through that with you offline, but I think you make a really good point, and I'm mindful of in the way with our acute providers in our delivery reports, we talk about metrics, and we also have a quality section for us to talk about what are the other elements that we might bring in for triangulation. That would be a really good addition to the agenda when we come to delivery meetings. So it'd be really helpful to get your insights in how we could really strengthen that.
Lincoln.
Yeah, and I guess the follow-on from that is how are we working with adult social care and the wider local authorities, because very often there are housing issues which can be quite challenging because of the specialist nature if you're going to house people in the community, as well as whether they're eligible for social care interventions, etc.
And Lincoln, you will see in the paper that a lot of this work has been done in conjunction with our mental health, learning disability and autism provider collaborative, and they are a wide-ranging collaborative that also include input from our local authorities and the voluntary sector. So I would expect that work has been done through there. I think it is reasonable for us to seek further assurance if we are seeing that the metrics don't support that view.
Okay, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just test out the financial implications? So we say in the sort of the beginning of the paper that the financial implications are part of the operational planning for 25-26. But then later in the paper, when we talk about the impact on Devon's objectives, we talk about further resources being required from NHS England, from the Mental Health Investment Standard or the SDF funding. So I guess I'm just wishing to clarify whether this has any financial implications over and above our 25-26 operational plan.
So we are still in a process of test and learn in terms of this space, and as ever, how far we mitigate the risk will be dependent on what resources we can put against it. So we feel that the resources that are already described in this plan will mitigate the risk enough. Inevitably, as we do work with our stakeholders and partners, they will describe more resource that could do more, and that will be subject to decisions in the future about further investment.
And Frank.
Thank you. As someone who delivers services to complex people out in the community, I absolutely would like to support Peter's scrutiny of this area. I don't think at board level we've had the same scrutiny of what happens in the mental health space as we have had in the acute trusts. And these are the numbers around this, my belief, were quite large a year ago, and we do need to have an understanding that some of these people are the most vulnerable in our society. And as Lincoln's already suggested, it's not just health that it impacts, and the solutions are not just health either. So a greater understanding at board level would be really appropriate.
Thanks, Frank. Do you want us to do more than we're doing at board level?
No, I was at the System Quality Group and asked about the numbers that's been picked up, but we need both the metrics and the narrative. And the narrative, we could have taken this and thought it was fine, but I don't know that I can be assured it is.
Thanks, Frank. Tandy.
With Frank, and I think in...
Tandy, could you put your microphone on? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just extending the point that Frank has made about mental health and the level of scrutiny that we've given it. In QPEC, the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, we did have an extension of not just the need for measures, but also sort of having a good grip on what quality means for mental health. And we're sort of thinking about that as being slightly different from the rest of the others, which look like it's easier to measure, you know, UEC and all that sort of stuff. It's a little bit harder to sort of have a broader understanding of what a quality mental health service looks like and by whose definition. And I think that makes me quite happy that you've incorporated family involvement in this. And I suspect that hopefully as you go on, maybe, you know, as the system goes on, you might be able to build back what feedback you're getting from families, given that this is a really complex set of patients to get their own feedback into the system. So, yeah, just wanted to make those 2 points.
So I think all very valid points, and I think I would reflect that we had our locality planning meetings to do the acute provider UEC elective care work last year, and the mental health version of that is only just getting into its stride now, and it will be a process of refining that through our committees and trying to describe what are the metrics that we should be interested in that provide an in the round good quality service, recognising that we have to do that within the parameters that we've set out in our annual planning and with the resources that we have. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Thanks, Tandy. To Steve.
Yeah, I was just coming on the general point that both Frank and Tandy have made, that of course we value what we measure and what we talk about. So there is certainly more to do in this regard. It is helpful to have this paper here for this specific cohort today. But there are two other things that were on the agenda today. I think it's just helpful just to note the strategy we're developing is a health and care strategy, not an acute strategy. And therefore we need to ensure that we understand, I think, what is quite a significant opportunity around transforming mental health services in Devon as part of this, and that's probably untapped at the moment. And then the second part is in the performance management framework. You'll see our mental health providers have their dashboards as well. Now, it probably isn't complete, but at least a start. And the more we can focus on those key measures for all of our providers, the more we'll also be much more on top of the performance drivers. I think there is a question about ensuring that in all of that we have the quality metrics, not just in mental health, but also in community and in other things that we rarely look at. But I think we're on a mission, if we could sort of read between the lines, of wanting a comprehensive health and care strategy for this board and whatever succeeds us, to be focused on that full agenda, not just any one part of it, which I think has been our history for now. So hopefully that reassures on the wider point.
Thanks, Steve. And Peter.
And just one last point for me, just in terms of this paper, said this paper is in response to a board request earlier in the year for assurance that the work was continuing rather than the impact had been seen yet. And the board should, of course, expect the impact to be described and seen later on, but this was specifically the assurance that the work to develop those things was happening.
Thanks for that, Peter. Any other questions? Sorry, Penny.
Picking up from Steve's point, so there's a piece of work that's near completion that's been discussed at QPEC, which is around the development of a quality dashboard. We've done significant work. There's a breadth, actually, of quality metrics, and of course performance metrics, workforce metrics all have impact on quality, so it's the triangulation. One of the key things about quality metrics is they tend to be measurement of things that have gone wrong. So the task I've asked my lead for this to look at is please now further develop that work into a quality insight piece so that it prospectively starts to inform our commissioning for quality.
Thanks, Penny. Okay, so we're asked to note the update on progress against the mental health assertive and intensive outreach action plan, and we specifically reference the continuing work on metrics to support that progress. Are we happy to note the progress? Thank you. We're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the establishment of mental health planning and delivery meetings. Are we happy to take a satisfactory level of assurance around that, around those meetings? Thank you. And And we're also asked to note that while the identified actions aim to reduce risks, some level of risk will remain, even with enhanced service delivery and workforce capacity aligned to this high-risk group of individuals. Okay, thanks for the work on it, Peter. Let's move on to the section 5.4 of the agenda. We have two finance reports, the NHS Devon finance report and the One Devon finance report. I suggest we take both of these together and invite Kirsty to take us into these items.
Thank you, Chair. Both of these reports were reviewed and discussed at the Finance and Performance Committee. Overall, everybody has achieved the plan, the revised plan, so the 20 million deficit overall for the system, and have submitted their accounts on that basis, and they're being audited at the moment, but I've got no indication that there are any issues or any of those numbers will change. So overall, asking for satisfactory in all aspects apart from the SIP. It's worth noting on the SIP delivery that we did overachieve. So against the 213 million, we did achieve 223 million, but we didn't do it at the recurrent rate that we set out to do. So we set out to have 70% of those recurrent, and we delivered 58% recurrent. So that's obviously had an impact on the underlying position and the 25-26 position as well. In terms of agency, it's worth noting that the 37 million was against a cap that was set nationally at 51 million, so we were way under the national cap, slightly off what the target we set ourselves by a few hundred K, but not too much. So again, that's a significant achievement. However, the whole time equivalents were over what we planned to set out, and that's been addressed through the workforce delivery group. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Kirsty? Okay. So in that case, then let's. I mean, first of all, thanks to you and your team and finance colleagues across the system, Kirsty, because I think this is a really good outcome. And as you say, you know, we've achieved the financial plan. You're flagging up that CIP was achieved at a lower level of recurrency than planned, but nevertheless it was achieved during the year. And I think it's a real success that we're under the level of the cap on agency spend, which was set nationally. So those are really things to take real assurance from. So we're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the information provided with regard to the NHS Devon financial position at the year ended 31st of March 25, and also to take satisfactory assurance from the information provided within the report with regard to the financial position of the One Devon integrated care system, and note the financial outturn unaudited as yet for the year end 24-25. Are we happy to agree to those two recommendations? Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Kirsty. Let's move on to section 6 of the meeting, which is the committee chair reports, and we come first of all to the report from the chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. So reporting from two of the Finance and Performance Committee meetings. So in April, we discussed NOF 4. We spent some time on the Devon annual plan, and then discussed the month 11 report. And we spent a lot of time on the 25-26 operational plan. You know, we've talked about those in the board and other committees, so I won't spend any time on them. In terms of escalation to the board, I'd like to add the committee's thanks to Kirsty and the team. So it's been a challenging year financially. So thank you, Kirsty, and thank you to all the finance teams and those in the providers as well. So it's been great to get here. Thank you. We talked about the key lines of inquiry with the 25-26 operational plan, which we've already been through in other board meetings. And we also talked about the risks in terms of landing the operational plan and the next steps we need to take. So again, we've covered those in various other conversations. I think the thing that we wanted to escalate to the board for action was to talk about how we could make planning a cyclical process rather than a time-limited event each year. We can see that that's the direction of travel nationally, can't we? We can see talks about medium-term financial planning. We've got a multi-year settlement and spending review. We'll have a 10-year plan. So from the FPC committee, we were keen that the board was cognizant of the fact that we needed to make this ongoing. And I think we've seen that that's where we're going. That's our intentions. And also that was something for us to raise to other committees as well. So for us as a group, how can we make sure that planning is cyclical and not a one-off event? So that was the April committee. In the May committee, we talked about NOF4, about the annual plan, and also about the financial delivery assurance for 25-26. We took assurance about the National Recovery Support Fund, which was a requirement. So we were provided with some funding but nationally to support the recovery performance work, and we took assurance that that had been appropriately spent. So we were content with that. We also noted how we would be doing some more work on the work plan for 25-26, recognising that might be amended as we go forward in terms of the objectives of 25-26. We also had a conversation about implied productivity, and I think that was something we want to do some more work on in the committee, but it was a really good starter to help us understand how productivity is measured in the NHS. So for escalation to the board, this is for information. We've talked about NOF4, so I won't talk about that, because what we were thinking about there is how that funding might work in the future, and if we were to lose a valuable resource from Alison and others and the team, how would we ensure that we keep going with that good work? We reflected the need to be very agile to revisit the annual plan for 25-26. We discussed the need for a deep dive into contracting, being mindful of the fact that delivery of the current financial year is dependent on us managing our contracts very well. So that that's a change from what we've needed to do in the past. So in the very distant past, the NHS was very cognizant of contract management. It's probably been less so in recent years. So we need to think about how we're going to get on top of the contract management. And then we started the work on productivity, but we need to do some more on that. So we wondered if that might come into a development session with the board as a whole, because that's absolutely going to be critical. And we can see it particularly coming as part of the 10-year plan as well. So that was it for me. Any questions for the committee?
Any questions for Kay? If not, then let's thank you for your reports, Kay, and let's note the assurance report from the Finance and Performance Committee. We move on now to the report from the committee chair from the People and Organisational Development Committee, Salma.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I'm anticipating that everyone has read the report, so I'm just going to draw out the key points. The meeting was almost in two halves. One half was looking at the previous year's performance and picking up any outstanding areas, and the second was looking at the moving forward into this year. So I'll start with the operational plan. That was the area that took most of our time. We focused on the workforce aspects in particular and identified a number of areas where we still had some outstanding concerns. The sorts of things that we expected to kind of get some clarification around was set out for you here, but some of them included some of the productivity challenge. How deliverable was that? Was the programmes such as CIPs backloaded or front-loaded? The things that we've already picked up here. We looked at things like if deficit support and compulsory redundancy funding wasn't available, how would we deliver the plan? We looked at the whole time increases due to investment, and we looked at the importance, I think it was UK, around grossing out some of the whole time reduction changes. On the one hand, reducing some of those planned changes, on the other hand, transformation schemes that may require additional input, making sure that we were looking at the whole rather than in part. We then looked at the development of the workforce, and I'm pleased to say that those changes, those concerns were fed into the work of the operational plan and have been reflected in the revised and the approved uptake. So that's good. We also looked at the workforce dashboard, and we were pleased to see some of the obvious metrics in there, such as whole time reduction, phasing, agency, bank reductions, workforce plans, sickness, attrition, those sorts of things that you would expect to see in a report of this nature. But we thought there were some additional areas that were needed, in particularly identifying corrective actions early enough to then be able to do something about them, particularly the backloading nature of the CIP programmes. We looked back at last year's annual plan delivery. There were a couple of areas where there were some outstanding actions, and those have been taken forward into this year's plan. We discussed the annual plan for this year and in particular the workforce areas around that. And again, I'm pleased that Kirsty and others have picked that up into this year's final plan. I think those were the regulatory, the ICB board functional regulatory requirements were met. There were no outstanding issues there. And I think those were the only issues that I want to flag up today. The escalation item in particular was really to flag up that the risks around the workforce element of delivering the operational plan were discussed in some detail. Mitigations were also discussed. That intelligence and insight was passed on and has been incorporated into the final plan. I did want to make one further comment, which wasn't discussed within the committee, but I think it's particularly relevant given the proposed restructuring that we're looking at. One of the things that we looked at, and Graham kindly forwarded to me within the audit committee, was an internal audit report on EDI. And although the outcomes of that were satisfactory, there were a number of areas where there was moderate assurance, a number of amber areas, which looked at things like, although the kind of policies were available to staff, they weren't necessarily up to date, and some further work to tidy those up, particularly around some of the protected characteristics were needed. And these were in hand, of course, but given what we're going to go through and given what we know about vulnerabilities and the people from, for example, Black and Minority Ethnic Committees, people with gender issues and some other characteristics tend to do less well within any organisational change. And I just wanted to make sure that we're cognisant of that as we go forward. We did discuss some of that within the audit committee, and the chair kindly sent the report to me. So I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that as well. And I think those were the key things.
Thank you, Sam. That's really helpful. Could I ask Philippa to just respond on the EDI point?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a really pertinent point. It was actually something that Steve and I were discussing yesterday. How do we make sure that those people from minority groups within the organisation are not disadvantaged during a time of change? So we have taken a decision to make sure that this is prioritised as part of the work, obviously part of the transition team. So we'll make sure that I take that forward with Piers, who's leading on the transition work. And we will also make sure that we build this into our work on strategy as well, because it's important that we have that thinking going forward into our strategy. We did have a ADI working group meeting that was due to take place this week. Unfortunately, we've had to stand it down because of absences, but we have a meeting in 3 weeks' time, I think, that we will be taking that forward, and we will have an identified action plan coming out of that, which will address a number of those internal audit actions as well.
Thank you, Philippa. Any questions for Salma? Okay, in that case, we will note the responses that we are making to the EDI shortfalls highlighted at the audit committee and flagged up by Salma in this meeting today, and we will note the assurance report from the People and Organisational Development Committee. Thank you. We now move on to item 6.3, which is the report from the Chair of the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, and I'll invite Tandy to take us into this item. Thanks, Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is for the meeting that we had in April. We didn't have any meetings in May due to changes in schedule, so it will sound a little bit out of date, but it is what it is. So we discussed the operational plan at that point, and that was noting the considerable progress that had been made up to that date, but obviously there was still a lot of work to be done then, which you're all up to date with in terms of how far that has gone. We then also did discuss the annual plan as well as risks, and there were some concerns about how achievable some of that and some of the objectives are in light of the changes in the NHS that we are expecting or that are underway at the moment. And we did say that there may obviously be some need for change to or update to some of those objectives given where the new NHS is going. We also discussed the Devon quality framework, and this was about taking assurance from the developing quality framework at that point. But since it's been a month and more since we discussed this, I don't know, Penny, if you've got anything to update in terms of how far that is now. Yeah.
Yes, so the quality framework has been completed. Obviously, it's at a point in time because it's a rapidly changing context. what is really clear is that the current statutory obligations remain in relation to quality. Obviously, we need to be thinking about it being more of a maintenance agenda at the moment rather than a developing agenda, although I refer to my previous point around making sure we pivot that work into the forward space. But the framework will come to the completed framework will come to the next committee.
Thank you. So we also did discuss the annual plan and delivery framework at that point, just noting the progress and any unfinished items there were carried forward to the 2025-26 cycle. We looked at the system quality group report. And in particular, we also did look at the EQIA, and the EQIA has been quite a running theme for this committee, and we're very pleased with how far it's gone, and I think that links in with the issue you're raising in terms of the impact and the quality on different people who may be vulnerable to changes, like the ones that we're just about to come up here. So we're quite pleased with how far the EQIA process has gone, taking note that obviously it's still evolving and certain things might still need to be adjusted. And then we also did look at regulatory engagement, and again the committee was quite assured that we've got good grip with regulatory issues to this point. Forward plan development, the work is underway in terms of the forward plan and the committee's terms of reference, and we expect this to come to the next committee, if not the one after that. Issues to escalate to the board. Again, this was about noting progress in development in terms of the compliance of the operating plan 2025, and you know where that is in this sense. And then we also did talk about the need to review objectives given the changes that we are facing regarding the ICB blueprint. But those are just issues to note rather than escalate any further.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point for matter of accuracy for escalation to the board. It's got the outcome of the Penny Dash review, bracket ICB blueprint. They're different documents, both talk to quality and elements of quality, but the Penny Dash review is likely to inform our approach further upon receipt.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Penny. Are there any questions for Tandy? Okay, in that case, I'm sorry, Salma.
No questions, but just some additional comments, really. We did spend quite a lot of time looking at the EQIA process, Tandy, as you say. A number of us, Tandy, myself and Kay, supported some of the provider assurance in readiness for the operational plan. And one of the things we found there were that the EQIAs with regards to CIPs were variable in terms of their development. And some areas and in some providers they were really strong and consistent across the piece, and in others they were less so. So it was an area that we kind of really wanted to pick up going forward into this year's work. And there was another area that's just slipped my mind, and if it comes back to me, Chair, I will. I had 2 points and the other one's just gone out. I will come back. But it was with regards to the assurance visits as well. So that's gone. But I think the EQIA work is really quite important, isn't it, going forward?
So this is subject to in-depth report to the forthcoming QPEC committee. So to make the three distinctions, or a couple of distinctions, there is the process that is within the ICB and the delivery of those EQIAs coming out of that process. So we've got very clear assurance statements on those. There is then those. Then there are those EQIAs relating to sovereign organisations that are only relevant to that sovereign organisation. And I think we really need to understand what is the role of the ICB in overseeing those as part of the broader operating plan. But certainly I think it's come up in conversation with yourselves and with chairs, and it came up at SQG and our joined up clinical cabinet and SQG purely focused on EQIAs. And then there are those EQIAs that may be being driven within an individual sovereign organisation but has knock-on impacts upon others. So this is the level of sophistication that we are pushing into. So I have positive assurance about the ICB delivery at the moment, and then we are working with others to make sure there is rigour in sovereign organisations. But the newly convened System Quality Group / Clinical Cabinet is the space where providers can push in those schemes either they're most worried about for peer review, or those schemes they think will have impact either on partners, provider partners, or should inform strategic commissioning intentions going forward.
Sam.
Yeah, I remembered what the other point was, if I may, just very quickly. Again, we picked it up within the provider assurance, and it was around clinical engagement. Again, we found it was really strong in some where the clinicians were actually leading the change, and in other areas they were perhaps involved less so, perhaps on the periphery. And I know we've picked that up in the strategy going forward, but I just wondered in the here and now, given the centrality of the CIP programmes, and the comments Penny's just made around the development of the EQIAs, whether that's something that we really need to be keeping an eye on as well, because without the clinical engagement and buy-in, it's very difficult to get the implementation done successfully.
Yeah, and I think the clinical engagement was on a wider scale rather than just on the EQIA process itself, but with reference to change. And I think we have discussed a number of things here where we've questioned what the level of engagement has been on that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Sam, I think you wanted to come in on this item.
It was just on that discussion on the EQIA, because certainly we found in my trust the term quality is a very broad definition, isn't it? And we've found it helpful in the context of the financial situation to differentiate between patient experience and patient safety, where certainly my organisation's position is patient safety is an absolute priority, but we recognise some of the actions we're taking will potentially have an impact on patient experience. And I don't know whether that's just a helpful mindset to be thinking about.
Sam, that's a really helpful frame of reference, and one of a key part of our training and our policy is about how do we make informed, transparent but difficult decisions. And I think that absolute piece around maintaining safety is key. I imagine West Streeting is interested in patient experience, but I think there has to be an understanding that reaching for exceptional levels of quality, it has to be affordable. So it has to be a discussion in the round. Thank you.
And Steve.
Sorry, just wanted to come in on, because there is a bit of a minefield here between sovereign accountability and not just about EQIA. I think the point around the level of assurance that naturally comes from seeing really good clinical involvement in design of CIPs and so on. There's something for us to explore as the strategic payer, as we're thinking about our performance management arrangements, about what we would expect from any provider, not to dictate the form or the process, but to expect that there is an evidence process for those impact assessments and indeed for clinical engagement. And then our performance route needs to be, if we're not getting that assurance, how do we use our escalations to get that assurance, because we have a responsibility for the money that we're giving to any provider. I think the performance management framework does some of that, but it's just made me reflect we do need to think about, I'm going to use the word in a completely different sense, the quality of the plans, which is going to be about all of those other things, clinical engagement, EQIA and so on. And we need to think about how we do that going forward without ever crossing that line into trying to do a sovereign organisation's sole responsibility.
And I think the clinical engagement process itself and the quality of it, really the narrative of why certain changes are required is quite important, because I think that you very easily get into that space where you're coming across as if you're trying to compromise quality and safety because you want to save money. And so I think part of that is because sometimes the benefits or the clinical benefits of change is probably not narrated well enough for engagement the other way. So I think the quality of engagement itself needs to be revisited.
Okay, thanks, Tandy, and thanks for the discussion. So we're asked to note the assurance report from the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. We've had a conversation in that assurance around the completion of the quality framework, reflecting the current statutory requirements which remain until they don't. and we've had a conversation around the EQIA processes and the progress we've made on that, and the need for further work, perhaps on the role of the ICB as strategic payer in setting expectations relating to evidence of EQIA in our provider organisation. Okay, thank you for that. Let's now move to 6.4, which is the report from the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, Graham.
Thank you. So we met earlier in May, so that's after the end of the financial year, but obviously too early to actually be able to report on decisions and recommendations. I think there was a board meeting scheduled back end of June, when both the Audit and Risk Committee will meet and the board will meet to approve that. By way of context, there is quite a lot of pressure to bring forward approval of annual report and accounts. We obviously get consolidated multiple levels before it gets to Parliament. Parliament wants to have the accounts laid and the pre-COVID timeline, which was actually summer recess. And it's achieved pre-winter Christmas recess, but not summer. So this pressure to speed up reporting is going to continue year on year. So we have seen a draft of the annual report and accounts. Obviously, that's subject to the completion of the external audit KPMG are conducting, and will obviously say their findings in due course. One element to it is the head of internal audit annual opinion. I think I've previously reported that the drafting of that was heading towards satisfactory, which is obviously up from the prior level of limited. So that's great to see that that is now being confirmed as the position. It's based on a number of factors. We obviously look at individual pieces of work that they do on our behalf, and the balance of where those have been coming out has been better. It's also looks at whether we implement the recommendations in a timely fashion and not. So I think it's great to see that as an organisation we've improved our position quite considerably. So that's great to see. Other than that, I have nothing else to escalate to the board. I mean, there are other things we obviously do. Look at use of company seal. We looked at the single action waiver list. We look at things like contracting and procurement, but I don't think there's anything of significance to report to this board.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions for Graham? Kay.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to raise something that we talked about at the committee, Graham, which was around the business continuity and how we hadn't got assurance from our auditors about our business continuity plans. And there's something for me about the cyber attacks we've seen, the power outages in Europe, other concerns, and of course we're going into a period of change now with the potential working with Cornwall. So there's something about, I think we do need to get on top of that as soon as we can, so that we've got assurance that we've got some robust business continuity plans.
Do you want to respond to that, Graham?
Well, no, I agree. I mean, obviously we've seen an EPRR policy piece here. We did do an internal audit review of the area. There were two levels to that. One is the system as a whole, and that's reliant upon a number of organisations, including the ambulance service and the like. It did come out with some recommendations around the ICB's capacity, and obviously that's something we will have to take account of as we go through our restructuring to make sure that our statutory duties, which we now do have as an ICB, can be met. So I agree with you.
Philippa, would you like to come in on this point?
I think the conversation stemmed from a piece of work undertaken by our internal auditors to support the completion of our data protection and security toolkit. and so it was particularly focused around cybersecurity and business continuity. It's a piece of work that we've always commissioned in two parts. First part, which takes place early in the year, ahead of the second part, which is just before we submit the toolkit, which is due in June. And of course, when you take that kind of approach, there's a risk that it comes out with a few more red flags than we would have at the end, because we're still working through that process. So I think our internal auditors did say that they were happy with the progress that we were making towards the completion, and I can confirm that a number of the actions that were flagged in that audit have been completed subsequently. So I anticipate coming back to the audit committee at its next meeting to be able to say that actually we're moving much better into a much better place in terms of that business continuity piece in particular.
Thanks, Philippa, and thanks, Graham. And let's just note that the Head of Internal Audit report overall satisfactory assurance is a real achievement, actually, after 3 years of the ICB. So thank you to everybody who's contributed to getting us to that point. If there's no other questions for Graham, we'll note the assurance report from the Audit and Risk Committee. Item 6.5 is the report from the Chair of the Population Health Improvement Committee. Lopa's not here today, so we'll take the report as read, but if there are any questions, I'd probably invite Peter to respond to them as the lead executive director. Are there any questions on Lopa's report from the Population Health Committee? If not, then let's note the report. And we can move into the closing items of the meeting, and we do today have some questions from the public on the agenda items, which we've had, and I'm going to ask Philippa to take us into those questions, and then I'll ask the relevant people to respond. Philippa.
Thank you. So our first question is around ICB reconfiguration. It comes in two parts. What are your thoughts on the proposed merger of the ICBs, and what challenges and benefits would this have?
And I'll ask Steve to respond to that, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The thoughts, I'll probably mix them both together, if I may, in order to kind of give a bit of an overview, because clearly with any kind of change, there are both positive and negative issues to that. So one of them, clearly on the negative side, is this is a great period of uncertainty for all of our staff, and given the size of the agenda we're dealing with, that's important, and how we keep the business as usual, how we keep our ambitions going, is going to be really important. I think on the positive side of the equation, there are many things that we should recognise. One is, as I said at the beginning, it is only a proposal at the moment, but the proposal around clustering and potential merging with Cornwall does fit very naturally with our patient flows across Devon and Cornwall, and that is not as simple in some areas of the country as it is down here. There are blessings to being surrounded by sea. It's not just about having lovely beaches. One of the important things around that, of course, is we all know for a long time now, the border between Devon and Cornwall can quite often get in the way of being able to do things around natural patient communities. So particularly for those people who look for their secondary care to Plymouth or indeed to North Devon, I think there's some real opportunities in aligning priorities in a single footprint across the ICB to help make those things work better. I think it's also, clearly something that the NHS has always got to be cognizant of, that we spend as little as we should, as we can on management costs, so that we can put as much into the front line. Now, clearly you need a certain amount of that, because actually you start to get diseconomies from that and inefficiencies. But this does also provide an opportunity, and it's part of the driver for these discussions, that we can reduce some of those costs by bringing things together, by eliminating some of the duplication, by strengthening teams, by doing things over a wider catchment. So that also feels quite important. And I think the other part for me, which again, it's probably not unique, but it is something around Devon and Cornwall. There is already a very strong tradition of working together on a whole range of things, whether that's acute provider, sustainability, some of the community work that we've been doing. That's something now that we can build on all of this. Certainly looking at it parochially, from a Devon point of view, there's also an awful lot we can learn from what Cornwall have been doing, particularly in their neighbourhood developments, where I think they're ahead of us, and I'm sure they would have equal things that they can benefit from us. So there's a bit of strengthening of everything overall by bringing those two things together. But bear in mind, organisational change, as we know, does bring some of those negative things as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Steve. Philippa?
Thank you. And then a further question, more specifically relating to ICB clustering of Devon and Cornwall. Read the downsizing of the ICB. In the clustering of Devon's ICB with that of Cornwall and the Scilly Isles, will Devon County Council be involved in this collaboration? Is this a move towards restructuring the NHS, starting with strategic health authorities?
Yes, apologies to people of the Scilly Isles. I didn't mention it in my last question. Very important to ensure that they are always included. I think the point to make, and I don't know whether it was inferred in the question, but just to clarify, as we all know, this isn't a reorganisation of county councils or councils. Clearly, there is a separate thing going on around local government reform, but what we're talking about is around the NHS structures. And of course, in whatever the new model is, and I think the model ICB work is really clear about this, how we work with our local authority colleagues is going to be really important in that strategic commissioning role. So for Devon and the other local authorities, we will want to ensure that we've absolutely secured the benefits of that partnership working.
Thank you. Next question, Philippa.
Thank you. This one's about NHS funding. The funding for the NHS was traditionally based on meeting clinical need. It now seems to be that the service needs to fit whatever funding is considered appropriate without reference to need. Is there any way that the ICB can challenge the current orthodoxy?
Steve.
I guess the thing we should acknowledge, because again I can understand the reason for the question, because the NHS is absolutely under significant financial pressure, as are many public services for reasons that we'll all understand. Is the funding formula for NHS services is fundamentally built on demographics and need. You can have a view on whether it's perfect or not, and whether it reflects everything in the way that we would want, but that has not changed in any of this. Of course, we should note in all of that notwithstanding the formula itself, we spend considerably more than that formula says. It's not a small amount. In total, if you take the deficit and our distance from target, this year our plan, if delivered, will mean we're spending £227 million more than that formula would say based on our demographics and need. So I don't think anything that we've suggested or being suggested around ICB clustering will impact on that funding, and actually that's the job that we've got in front of us to address that gap.
Thanks, Steve. Philippa, next question.
Excuse me. There are two questions in relation to local infrastructure and surgical capacity. The first question is, what role, if any, does the ICB have in the allocation of capital funding for hospital infrastructure? Were you consulted on the need to upgrade NDDH? Do you have any influence over or with Wes Streeting? And then the second related question, how does the ICB propose supporting the surgical capacity for Devon when NDDH Barnstaple Hospital has operating theatres and an ICU not fit for the future?
Thanks, Philippa. So I'd like to invite John to respond to those two questions.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John.
So the ICB certainly has a role in the distribution of its annual capital. Now, this capital will be used for estates backlog, it'll be used for infrastructure updates, so it's a really, really important discussion, actually. It's currently allocated on a fair share basis, and there'll be a number of matrices that actually, or some metrics that will support that, such as turnover. Now, in regard to the new hospital programme, funding for this infrastructure programme, the upgrades and developments actually, is a direct conversation between the new hospital programme and the applicant trust. Okay, so I said we wouldn't be consulted on that actually simply because it's a process that is driven nationally. So in terms of the second question, again, really, really important. In the short term, the drive behind this actually is the requirement to replace the air handling plant in the current two inpatient theatres. Now, completing this two-theatre work will mean they will have to close down for a significant period of time. So the conversation is, how do we address that risk? So Royal Devon acknowledged that so the first thing we do would be look to see if there was capacity across the system actually, but it's very, very clear in conversations that there's insufficient capacity across the Devon system to support this. Therefore, RDU are putting 2 modular theatres in place on the same site to enable that work to continue. So the same number of patients will be treated. So I think moving on, that once that's completed, these additional modular theatres will remain, and that allows for the return of a temporary vanguard theatre, which is currently there but coming towards the end of its lease, and allows for the closure of one of the oldest theatres in North Devon to close as well. So there'll be no net loss of theatres. So how are we supporting that? That's going to need funding, and we are supporting Royal Devon in seeking funding for that actually. The last point in terms of ICU, there's relatively few patients in North Devon that need ICU post-surgery, and there are clear pathways for escalation to the Royal Devon Exeter site in those cases. Now, on a broader note, I think it's important that the last number of years, actually, certainly Sam would have led this for 2 of those, actually, under his elective lead at this time, actually. The use of system resource across Devon is really important. So I said we do constantly make advantage of actually each of our additional surgical units is a system asset, and we will continue to use that. And we're also in a process to gain £20 million of capital for a new day surgery unit on the RDU Exeter site. Okay.
Thank you, John. Philippa.
Thank you. Next question is on MIUs. What are your criteria for determining if a community warrants an MIU?
Yeah, so there are a range of criteria that are very, very much the same as most commission services. So we'll be looking at population need, so need not want, demand on existing services, distance from other services, our clinical need, current estates, safe staffing and affordability. But it's also important to recognise the National Director of Travel in this discussion. We're working towards the ambition of introducing standardised urgent care centres. So this is the aim of reducing the confusing mix of urgent care centres of services we have with UTCs and MIUs. UTCs offer a much broader range of urgent care, including some illnesses, injury services, actually beyond the scope of an MIU. And they're also open larger hours, normally 12 hours a day.
Thanks, John. And the final question from the public, Philippa.
Thank you. This one relates to fertility standards. Is Devon ICB meeting the NICE Fertility Problems Quality Standard 2014 for commissioners of fertility treatment in relation to IVF for women under 40 years? If not, how is Devon ICB justifying sub-quality healthcare provision for local women, given the Department of Health and Social Care has stated they expect ICBs in England to use their budgets to commission fertility care in line with NICE guidance?
Okay, so there are 9 statements within that 2014 quality standard. As an ICB, Devon meets 7 of those standards and partially meet 2. Where we partially meet 2, there are ICB policies from the previous commission organisation to support why they're partially met.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Philippa. And the answers to those questions from the public, we will build those into the minutes of the meeting so that they will be available to everybody. Thank you very much. We now come to the end of the meeting, but can I just ask, is there any other business from board members? So if not, then we can close the meeting. The next meeting of the board in public will be on Thursday, the 31st of July. Thank you very much for your contributions today.